Chapter 46 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 46. It was the poor schoolmaster. No other than the poor schoolmaster. Scarcely less moved and surprised by the sight of the child than she had been on recognizing him, he stood for a moment silent and confounded by this unexpected apparition, without even the presence of mind to raise her from the ground. But, quickly recovering his self-possession, he threw down his stick and book, and dropping on one knee beside her, endeavoured by such simple means as occurred to him to restore her to herself, while her grandfather, standing idly by, wrung his hands and implored her with many endearing expressions to speak to him, were it only a word. 'She is quite exhausted,' said the schoolmaster, glancing upward into his face. 'You have taxed her powers too far, friend.' 'She is perishing of want,' rejoined the old man. 'I never thought how weak and ill she was till now.' Casting a look upon him, half reproachful and half compassionate, the schoolmaster took the child in his arms, and, bidding the old man gather up her little basket and follow him directly, bore her away at his utmost speed. There was a small inn within sight, to which, it would seem, he had been directing his steps when so unexpectedly overtaken. Towards this place he hurried with his unconscious burden, and rushing into the kitchen, and calling upon the company there assembled to make way for God's sake, deposited it on a chair before the fire. The company, who rose in confusion at the schoolmaster's entrance, did as people usually do under such circumstances. Everybody called for his or her favourite remedy, which nobody brought. Each cried for more air, at the same time carefully excluding what air there was by closing round the object of sympathy, and all wondered why somebody else didn't do whatever it never appeared to occur to them might be done by themselves. The landlady, however, who possessed more readiness and activity than any of them, and who had withal a quicker perception of the merits of the case, soon came running in with a little hot brandy and water, followed by her servant girl carrying vinegar, hartshorn, smelling salts, and such other restoratives, which, being duly administered, recovered the child so far as to enable her to thank them in a faint voice, and to extend her hand to the poor schoolmaster, who stood with an anxious face hard by. Without suffering her to speak another word, or so much as to stir a finger any more, the woman straightway carried her off to bed, and having covered her up warm, bathed her cold feet, and wrapped them in flannel, they dispatched a messenger for the doctor. The doctor, who was a red-nosed gentleman with a great bunch of seals dangling below a waistcoat of ribbed black satin, arrived with all speed, and taking his seat by the bedside of poor Nell, drew out his watch and felt her pulse. Then he looked at her tongue. Then he felt her pulse again, and while he did so, he eyed the half-empty wine-glass as if in profound abstraction. 'I should give her,' said the doctor at length, 'a teaspoonful every now and then of hot brandy and water.'
'Why, that's exactly what we've done, sir,' said the delighted landlady.
'I should also,' observed the doctor, who had passed the footbath on the stairs, 'I should also,' said the doctor in the voice of an oracle, 'put her feet in hot water, and wrap them up in flannel. I should likewise,' said the doctor with increased solemnity, 'give her something light for supper. The wing of a roasted fowl now—'
'Why, goodness gracious me, sir, it's cooking at the kitchen fire this instant!'
cried the landlady. And so indeed it was, for the schoolmaster had ordered it to be put down, and it was getting on so well that the doctor might have smelt it if he had tried. Perhaps he did. 'You may then,' said the doctor, rising gravely, 'give her a glass of hot mulled port wine, if she likes wine.'
'And a toast, sir?'
suggested the landlady. 'Ay,' said the doctor, in the tone of a man who makes a dignified concession, 'and a toast.
of bread. But be very particular to make it of bread, if you please, ma'am.'
With which parting injunction, slowly and portentously delivered, the doctor departed, leaving the whole house in admiration of that wisdom which tallied so closely with their own. Everybody said he was a very shrewd doctor indeed, and knew perfectly what people's constitutions were, which there appears some reason to suppose he did. While her supper was preparing, the child fell into a refreshing sleep, from which they were obliged to rouse her when it was ready. As she evinced extraordinary uneasiness on learning that her grandfather was below stairs, and as she was greatly troubled at the thought of their being apart, he took his supper with her. Finding her still very restless on this head, they made him up a bed in an inner room, to which he presently retired. The key of this chamber happened, by good fortune, to be on that side of the door which was in Nell's room. She turned it on him when the landlady had withdrawn, and crept to bed again with a thankful heart. The schoolmaster sat for a long time smoking his pipe by the kitchen fire, which was now deserted, thinking, with a very happy face, on the fortunate chance which had brought him so opportunely to the child's assistance, and parrying as well in his simple way he could the inquisitive cross-examination of the landlady, who had a great curiosity to be made acquainted with every particular of Nell's life and history. The poor schoolmaster was so open-hearted, and so little versed in the most ordinary cunning or deceit, that she could not have failed to succeed in the first 5 minutes, but that he happened to be unacquainted with what she wished to know, and so he told her. The landlady, by no means satisfied with this assurance, which she considered an ingenious evasion of the question, rejoined that he had his reasons, of course. Heaven forbid that she should wish to pry into the affairs of her customers, which indeed were no business of hers, who had so many of her own. She had merely asked a civil question, and to be sure she knew it would meet with a civil answer. She was quite satisfied? Quite. She had rather, perhaps, that he would have said at once that he didn't choose to be communicative, because that would have been plain and intelligible. However, she had no right to be offended, of course. He was the best judge, and had a perfect right to say what he pleased. Nobody could dispute that for a moment. Oh dear no.
'I assure you, my good lady,' said the mild schoolmaster, 'that I have told you the plain truth. As I hope to be saved, I have told you the truth.'
'Why then, I do believe you are in earnest,' rejoined the landlady, with ready good humour, 'and I'm very sorry I have teased you, but curiosity, you know, is the curse of our sex, and that's the fact.'
The landlord scratched his head, as if he thought the curse sometimes involved the other sex likewise, but he was prevented from making any remark to that effect, if he had it in contemplation to do so, by the schoolmaster's rejoinder.
'You should question me for 6 hours at a sitting, and welcome, and I would answer you patiently for the kindness of heart you have shown to-night, if I could,' he said. 'As it is, please to take care of her in the morning, and let me know early how she is, and to understand that I am paymaster for the 3.
So, parting with them on most friendly terms, not the less cordial perhaps for this last direction, the schoolmaster went to his bed, and the host and hostess to theirs. The report in the morning was that the child was better, but was extremely weak, and would at least require a day's rest, and careful nursing, before she could proceed upon her journey. The schoolmaster received this communication with perfect cheerfulness, observing that he had a day to spare, 2 days for that matter, and could very well afford to wait. As the patient was to sit up in the evening, he appointed to visit her in her room at a certain hour, and rambling out with his book, did not return until the hour arrived. Nell could not help weeping when they were left alone, whereat, and at sight of her pale face and wasted figure, the simple schoolmaster shed a few tears himself, at the same time showing in very energetic language how foolish it was to do so, and how very easily it could be avoided if one tried.
'It makes me unhappy, even in the midst of all this kindness,' said the child, 'to think that we should be a burden upon you. How can I ever thank you? If I had not met you so far from home, I must have died, and he would have been left alone.'
'We'll not talk about dying,' said the schoolmaster. And as to burdens, I have made my fortune since you slept at my cottage.'
'Indeed!'
cried the child joyfully. 'Oh yes,' returned her friend. 'I have been appointed clerk and schoolmaster to a village a long way from here, and a long way from the old one, as you may suppose, at £35 a year. £35.
'I am very glad,' said the child. 'So very, very glad.'
'I am on my way there now,' resumed the schoolmaster. 'They allowed me the stagecoach hire, outside stagecoach hire, all the way. Bless you, they grudge me nothing. But as the time at which I am expected there left me ample leisure, I determined to walk instead. How glad I am to think I did so!'
'How glad should we be!'
'Yes, yes,' said the schoolmaster, moving restlessly in his chair. 'Certainly that's very true. But you, where are you going? Where are you coming from? What have you been doing since you left me? What had you been doing before? Now tell me. Do tell me. I know very little of the world, and perhaps you are better fitted to advise me in its affairs than I am qualified to give advice to you. But I am very sincere, and I have a reason, you have not forgotten it, for loving you. I have felt since that time as if my love for him who died had been transferred to you who stood beside his bed. If this,' he added, looking upwards, 'is the beautiful creation that springs from ashes, let its peace prosper with me, as I deal tenderly and compassionately by this young child.' The plain, frank kindness of the honest schoolmaster, the affectionate earnestness of his speech and manner, the truth which was stamped upon his every word and look, gave the child a confidence in him which the utmost arts of treachery and dissimulation could never have awakened in her breast. She told him all: that they had no friend or relative, that she had fled with the old man to save him from a madhouse and all the miseries he dreaded, that she was flying now to save him from himself, and that she sought an asylum in some remote and primitive place, where the temptation before which he fell would never enter, and her late sorrows and distresses could have no place. The schoolmaster heard her with astonishment. 'This child,' he thought, 'has this child heroically persevered under all doubts and dangers, struggled with poverty and suffering, upheld and sustained by strong affection and the consciousness of rectitude alone? And yet the world is full of such heroism. Have I yet to learn that the hardest and best borne trials are those which are never chronicled in any earthly record, and are suffered every day? And should I be surprised to hear the story of this child?' What more he thought or said matters not. It was concluded that Nell and her grandfather should accompany him to the village whither he was bound, and that he should endeavour to find them some humble occupation by which they could subsist. 'We shall be sure to succeed,' said the schoolmaster heartily. 'The cause is too good a one to fail.' They arranged to proceed upon their journey next evening, as a stage waggon, which travelled for some distance on the same road as they must take, would stop at the inn to change horses, and the driver for a small gratuity would give Nell a place inside. A bargain was soon struck when the waggon came, and in due time it rolled away, with the child comfortably bestowed among the softer packages, her grandfather and the schoolmaster walking on beside the driver, and the landlady and all the good folks of the inn screaming out their good wishes and farewells. What a soothing, luxurious, drowsy way of travelling, to lie inside that slowly moving mountain, listening to the tinkling of the horses' bells, the occasional smacking of the carter's whip, the smooth rolling of the great broad wheels, the rattle of the harness, the cheery good nights of passing travellers jogging past on little short-stepped horses, all made pleasantly indistinct by the thick awning which seemed made for lazy listening under,
till one fell asleep. The very going to sleep, still with an indistinct idea, as the head jogged to and fro upon the pillow, of moving onward with no trouble or fatigue, and hearing all these sounds like dreamy music, lulling to the senses, and the slow waking up and finding one's self staring out through the breezy curtain half opened in the front, far up into the cold bright sky with its countless stars, and downward at the driver's lantern dancing on like its namesake, Jack of the Swamps and Marshes, and sideways at the dark grim trees, and forward at the long bare road rising up, 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 until it stopped abruptly at a sharp high ridge as if there were no more road, and all beyond was sky, and the stopping at the inn to bait, and being helped out, and going into a room with fire and candles, and winking very much, and being agreeably reminded that the night was cold, and anxious for very comfort's sake to think it colder than it was. What a delicious journey was that journey in the waggon! Then the going on again, so fresh at first, and shortly afterwards so sleepy. The waking from a sound nap as the mail came dashing past like a highway comet, with gleaming lamps and rattling hoofs, and visions of a guard behind, standing up to keep his feet warm, and of a gentleman in a fur cap, opening his eyes and looking wild and stupefied. The stopping at the turnpike, where the man was gone to bed, and knocking at the door until he answered with a smothered shout from under the bedclothes in the little room above, where the faint light was burning, and presently came down, night-capped and shivering, to throw the gate wide open and wish all waggons off the road except by day. The cold sharp interval between night and morning, the distant streak of light widening and spreading, and turning from grey to white, and from white to yellow, and from yellow to burning red, the presence of day, with all its cheerfulness and life, men and horses at the plough, birds in the trees and hedges, and boys in solitary fields, frightening them away with rattles. The coming to a town, people busy in the markets, light carts and chaises round the tavern yard, tradesmen standing at their doors, men running horses up and down the street for sale, pigs plunging and grunting in the dirty distance, getting off with long strings at their legs, running into clean chemist shops and being dislodged with brooms by prentices, the night coach changing horses, the passengers cheerless, cold, ugly, and discontented, with 3 months' growth of hair in one night, the coachman fresh as from a bandbox and exquisitely beautiful by contrast. So much bustle, so many things in motion, such a variety of incidents. When was there a journey with so many delights as that journey in the waggon? Sometimes walking for a mile or two while her grandfather rode inside, and sometimes even prevailing upon the schoolmaster to take her place and lie down to rest, Nell travelled on very happily until they came to a large town, where the waggon stopped and where they spent a night. They passed a large church, and in the streets were a number of old houses, built of a kind of earth or plaster, crossed and recrossed in a great many directions with black beams, which gave them a remarkable and very ancient look. The doors, too, were arched and low, some with oaken portals and quaint benches, where the former inhabitants had sat on summer evenings. The windows were latticed in little diamond panes that seemed to wink and blink upon the passengers as if they were dim of sight. They had long since got clear of the smoke and furnaces, except in one or two solitary instances, where a factory planted among fields withered the space about it like a burning mountain. When they had passed through this town, they entered again upon the country, and began to draw near their place of destination. It was not so near, however, but that they spent another night upon the road. Not that their doing so was quite an act of necessity, but that the schoolmaster, when they approached within a few miles of his village, had a fidgety sense of his dignity as the new clerk, and was unwilling to make his entry in dusty shoes and travel-disordered dress. It was a fine, clear autumn morning when they came upon the scene of his promotion and stopped to contemplate its beauties. "See, here's the church!" cried the delighted schoolmaster in a low voice, "and that old building close beside it is the schoolhouse, I'll be sworn. £35 a year in this beautiful place!" They admired everything: the old grey porch, the mullioned windows, the venerable gravestones dotting the green churchyard, the ancient tower, the very weathercock, the brown thatched roofs of cottage, barn, and homestead peeping from among the trees, the stream that rippled by the distant water-mill, the blue Welsh mountains far away. It was for such a spot the child had wearied in the dense, dark, miserable haunts of labour. Upon her bed of ashes, and amidst the squalid horrors through which they had forced their way, visions of such scenes, beautiful indeed, but not more beautiful than this sweet reality, had been always present to her mind. They had seemed to melt into a dim and airy distance, as the prospect of ever beholding them again grew fainter, but, as they receded, she had loved and panted for them more. 'I must leave you somewhere for a few minutes,' said the schoolmaster, at length breaking the silence into which they had fallen in their gladness. 'I have a letter to present and inquiries to make, you know. Where shall I take you? To the little inn yonder?'
'Let us wait here,' rejoined Nell. 'The gate is open. We will sit in the church porch till you come back.'
'A good place too,' said the schoolmaster, leading the way towards it, disencumbering himself of his portmanteau and placing it on the stone seat. 'Be sure that I come back with good news, and am not long gone.' So, the happy schoolmaster put on a brand new pair of gloves which he had carried in a little parcel in his pocket all the way, and hurried off, full of ardour and excitement. The child watched him from the porch until the intervening foliage hid him from her view, and then stepped softly out into the old churchyard, so solemn and quiet that every rustle of her dress upon the fallen leaves which strewed the path and made her footsteps noiseless, seemed an invasion of its silence. It was a very aged, ghostly place. The church had been built many hundreds of years ago, and had once had a convent or monastery attached, for arches in ruins, remains of oriel windows, and fragments of blackened walls were yet standing, while other portions of the old building, which had crumbled away and fallen down, were mingled with the churchyard earth and overgrown with grass, as if they too claimed a burying place, and sought to mix their ashes with the dust of men. Hard by these gravestones of dead years, and forming a part of the ruin which some pains had been taken to render habitable in modern times, were two small dwellings with sunken windows and oaken doors, fast hastening to decay, empty and desolate. Upon these tenements the attention of the child became exclusively riveted. She knew not why. The church, the ruin, the antiquated graves, had equal claims at least upon the stranger's thoughts, but from the moment when her eyes first rested on these two dwellings, she could turn to nothing else. Even when she had made the circuit of the enclosure, and, returning to the porch, sat pensively waiting for their friend, she took her station where she could still look upon them, and felt as if fascinated towards that spot. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 47. Kit's mother and the single gentleman, upon whose track it is expedient to follow with hurried steps, lest this history should be chargeable with inconstancy and the offence of leaving its characters in situations of uncertainty and doubt. Kit's mother and the single gentleman, speeding onward in the post-chaise and four, whose departure from the notary's door we have already witnessed, soon left the town behind them, and struck fire from the flints of the broad highway. The good woman, being not a little embarrassed by the novelty of her situation, and certain material apprehensions that perhaps by this time little Jacob, or the baby, or both, had fallen into the fire, or tumbled downstairs, or had been squeezed behind doors, or had scalded their windpipes in endeavouring to allay their thirst at the spouts of tea-kettles, preserved an uneasy silence, and meeting from the window the eyes of turnpike men, omnibus drivers, and others, felt in the new dignity of her position like a mourner at a funeral, who, not being greatly afflicted by the loss of the departed, recognizes his everyday acquaintance from the window of the mourning coach, but is constrained to preserve a decent solemnity
and the appearance of being indifferent to all external objects. To have been indifferent to the companionship of the single gentleman would have been tantamount to being gifted with nerves of steel. Never did chaise inclose or horses draw such a restless gentleman as he. He never sat in the same position for 2 minutes together, but was perpetually tossing his arms and legs about, pulling up the sashes and letting them violently down, or thrusting his head out of one window to draw it in again and thrust it out of another. He carried in his pocket, too, a firebox of mysterious and unknown construction, and as sure as ever Kit's mother closed her eyes, so surely, whisk, rattle, fizz, there was the single gentleman consulting his watch by a flame of fire, and letting the sparks fall down among the straw, as if there were no such thing as a possibility of himself and Kit's mother being roasted alive before the boys could stop their horses. Whenever they halted to change, there he was, out of the carriage without letting down the steps, bursting about the inn-yard like a lighted cracker, pulling out his watch by lamplight and forgetting to look at it before he put it up again, and in short, committing so many extravagances that Kit's mother was quite afraid of him. Then, when the horses were to, in he came like a harlequin, and before they had gone a mile, out came the watch and the firebox together, and Kit's mother as wide awake again, with no hope of a wink of sleep for that stage. 'Are you comfortable?' the single gentleman would say, after one of these exploits, turning sharply round.
'Quite, sir, thank you.'
'Are you sure? Aren't you cold?'
'It is a little chilly, sir,' Kit's mother would reply.
'I knew it!' cried the single gentleman, letting down one of the front glasses. 'She wants some brandy and water. Of course she does. How could I forget it? Hallo! Stop at the next inn, and call out for a glass of hot brandy and water.' It was in vain for Kit's mother to protest that she stood in need of nothing of the kind. The single gentleman was inexorable, and whenever he had exhausted all other modes and fashions of restlessness, it invariably occurred to him that Kit's mother wanted brandy and water. In this way they travelled on until near midnight, when they stopped to supper, for which meal the single gentleman ordered everything eatable that the house contained, and because Kit's mother didn't eat everything at once, and eat it all, he took it into his head that she must be ill. 'You're faint,' said the single gentleman, who did nothing himself but walk about the room. 'I see what's the matter with you, ma'am. You're faint.'
'Thank you, sir, I'm not indeed.'
'I know you are. I'm sure of it. I drag this poor woman from the bosom of her family at a minute's notice, and she goes on getting fainter and fainter before my eyes. I'm a pretty fellow. How many children have you got, ma'am?'
'Two, sir, besides Kit.'
'Boys, ma'am?'
'Yes, sir.'
'Are they christened?'
'Only half baptized as yet, sir.'
'I'm godfather to both of them. Remember that, if you please, ma'am. You'd better have some mulled wine.'
'I couldn't touch a drop indeed, sir.'
'You must,' said the single gentleman. 'I see you want it. I ought to have thought of it before.' Immediately flying to the bell, and calling for mulled wine as impetuously as if it had been wanted for instant use in the recovery of some person apparently drowned, the single gentleman made Kit's mother swallow a bumper of it at such a high temperature that the tears ran down her face, and then hustled her off to the chaise again, where, not impossibly from the effects of this agreeable sedative, she soon became insensible to his restlessness and fell fast asleep. Nor were the happy effects of this prescription of a transitory nature, as, notwithstanding that the distance was greater and the journey longer than the single gentleman had anticipated, she did not awake until it was broad day and they were clattering over the pavement of a town. 'This is the place!' cried her companion, letting down all the glasses. 'Drive to the waxwork.' The boy on the wheeler touched his hat, and setting spurs to his horse, to the end that they might go in brilliantly, all four broke into a smart canter, and dashed through the streets with a noise that brought the good folks wondering to their doors and windows, and drowned the sober voices of the town clocks as they chimed out 8:30. They drove up to a door round which a crowd of persons were collected, and there stopped. 'What's this?' said the single gentleman, thrusting out his head. 'Is anything the matter here?'
'A wedding, sir, a wedding!' cried several voices. 'Hurrah!' The single gentleman, rather bewildered by finding himself the centre of this noisy throng, alighted with the assistance of one of the postilions,
and handed out Kit's mother, at sight of whom the populace cried out, "Here's another wedding!" and roared and leaped for joy.
"The world has gone mad, I think," said the single gentleman, pressing through the concourse with his supposed bride. "Stand back here, will you, and let me knock."
Anything that makes a noise is satisfactory to a crowd. A score of dirty hands were raised directly to knock for him, and seldom has a knocker of equal powers been made to produce more deafening sounds than this particular engine on the occasion in question. Having rendered these voluntary services, the throng modestly retired a little, preferring that the single gentleman should bear their consequences alone.
"Now, sir, what you want?"
said a man with a large white bow at his buttonhole, opening the door and confronting him with a very stoical aspect.
"Who has been married here, my friend?" said the single gentleman.
"I have."
"You? And to whom, in the devil's name?"
"What right have you to ask?" returned the bridegroom, eyeing him from top to toe.
"What right?"
cried the single gentleman, drawing the arm of Kit's mother more tightly through his own, for that good woman evidently had it in contemplation to run away.
"A right you little dream of. Mind, good people, if this fellow has been marrying a minor, that can't be. Where is the child you have here, my good fellow? You call her Nell. Where is she?"
As he propounded this question, which Kit's mother echoed, somebody in a room near at hand uttered a great shriek, and a stout lady in a white dress came running to the door, and supported herself upon the bridegroom's arm.
"Where is she?" cried this lady. "What news have you brought me? What has become of her?"
The single gentleman started back, and gazed upon the face of the late Mrs Jarley, that morning wedded to the philosophic George, to the eternal wrath and despair of Mr Slum the poet, with looks of conflicting apprehension, disappointment, and incredulity. At length he stammered out,
"I ask you where she is. What do you mean?"
"Oh, sir," cried the bride, "if you have come here to do her any good, why weren't you here a week ago?"
"She is not dead?"
said the person to whom she addressed herself, turning very pale.
"No, not so bad as that." "I thank God!" cried the single gentleman feebly. "Let me come in." They drew back to admit him, and when he had entered, closed the door. "You see in me, good people," he said, turning to the newly married couple, "one to whom life itself is not dearer than the two persons whom I seek. They would not know me. My features are strange to them. But if they or either of them are here, take this good woman with you, and let them see her first, for her they both know. If you deny them from any mistaken regard or fear for them, judge of my intentions by their recognition of this person as their old humble friend." "I always said it," cried the bride. "I knew she was not a common child. Alas, sir, we have no power to help you, for all that we could do has been tried in vain." With that they related to him, without disguise or concealment, all that they knew of Nell and her grandfather, from their first meeting with them down to the time of their sudden disappearance, adding, which was quite true, that they had made every possible effort to trace them, but without success, having been at first in great alarm for their safety, as well as on account of the suspicions to which they themselves might one day be exposed in consequence of their abrupt departure. They dwelt upon the old man's imbecility of mind, upon the uneasiness the child had always testified when he was absent, upon the company he had been supposed to keep, and upon the increased depression which had gradually crept over her, and changed her both in health and spirits. Whether she had missed the old man in the night, and knowing or conjecturing whither he had bent his steps, had gone in pursuit, or whether they had left the house together, they had no means of determining. Certain they considered it, that there was but slender prospect left of hearing of them again, and that whether their flight originated with the old man or with the child, there was now no hope of their return.
To all this the single gentleman listened with the air of a man quite borne down by grief and disappointment. He shed tears when they spoke of the grandfather, and appeared in deep affliction. Not to protract this portion of our narrative, and to make short work of a long story, let it be briefly written that before the interview came to a close, the single gentleman deemed he had sufficient evidence of having been told the truth, and that he endeavoured to force upon the bride and bridegroom an acknowledgment of their kindness to the unfriended child, which, however, they steadily declined accepting. In the end, the happy couple jolted away in the caravan to spend their honeymoon in a country excursion, and the single gentleman and Kit's mother stood ruefully before their carriage door. 'Where shall we drive you, sir?' said the postboy. 'You may drive me,' said the single gentleman, 'to the—' He was not going to add inn, but he added it for the sake of Kit's mother, and to the inn they went. Rumours had already got abroad that the little girl who used to show the waxwork was the child of great people who had been stolen from her parents in infancy and had only just been traced. Opinion was divided whether she was the daughter of a prince, a duke, an earl, a viscount, or a baron, but all agreed upon the main fact, and that the single gentleman was her father, and all bent forward to catch a glimpse, though it were only of the tip of his noble nose, as he rode away, desponding, in his 4-horse chaise. What would he have given to know, and what sorrow would have been saved if he had only known, that at that moment both child and grandfather were seated in the old church porch, patiently awaiting the schoolmaster's return. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 48. Popular rumour concerning the single gentleman and his errand, travelling from mouth to mouth, and waxing stronger in the marvellous as it was bandied about, for your popular rumour, unlike the rolling stone of the proverb, is one which gathers a deal of moss in its wanderings up and down, occasioned his dismounting at the inn door to be looked upon as an exciting and attractive spectacle which could scarcely be enough admired, and drew together a large concourse of idlers, who, having recently been, as it were, thrown out of employment by the closing of the waxwork and the completion of the nuptial ceremonies, considered his arrival as little else than a special providence, and hailed it with demonstrations of the liveliest joy. Not at all participating in the general sensation, but wearing the depressed and wearied look of one who sought to meditate on his disappointment in silence and privacy, the single gentleman alighted, and handed out Kit's mother with a gloomy politeness which impressed the lookers on extremely. That done, he gave her his arm and escorted her into the house, while several active waiters ran on before as a skirmishing party to clear the way, and to show the room which was ready for their reception. 'Any room will do,' said the single gentleman. 'Let it be near at hand, that's all.' 'Close here, sir, if you please to walk this way.'
'Would the gentleman like this room?' said a voice, as a little out-of-the-way door at the foot of the well staircase flew briskly open, and a head popped out. 'He's quite welcome to it. He's as welcome as flowers in May or coals at Christmas. Would you like this room, sir? Honour me by walking in. Do me the favour, pray.'
'Goodness gracious me!' cried Kit's mother, falling back in extreme surprise. 'Only think of this!' She had some reason to be astonished, for the person who proffered the gracious invitation was no other than Daniel Quilp. The little door out of which he had thrust his head was close to the inn larder, and there he stood, bowing with grotesque politeness, as much at his ease as if the door were that of his own house, blighting all the legs of mutton and cold roast fowls by his close companionship, and looking like the evil genius of the cellars come from underground upon some work of mischief.
'Would you do me the honour?' said Quilp.
'I prefer being alone,' replied the single gentleman.
Oh,
said Quilp, and with that he darted in again with one jerk and clapped the little door to, like a figure in a Dutch clock when the hour strikes.
why, it was only last night, sir, whispered Kit's mother, that I left him in Little Bethel.
Indeed, said her fellow passenger. When did that person come here, waiter?
Come down by the night coach this morning, sir.
And when is he going?
Can't say, sir, really. When the chambermaid asked him just now if he should want a bed, sir, he first made faces at her and then wanted to kiss her.
Beg him to walk this way, said the single gentleman. I should be glad to exchange a word with him, tell him. Beg him to come at once, do you hear? The man stared on receiving these instructions, for the single gentleman had not only displayed as much astonishment as Kit's mother at sight of the dwarf, but, standing in no fear of him, had been at less pains to conceal his dislike and repugnance. He departed on his errand, however, and immediately returned, ushering in its object.
Your servant, sir, said the dwarf. I encountered your messenger halfway. I thought you'd allow me to pay my compliments to you. I hope you're well. I hope you're very well.
There was a short pause, while the dwarf, with half-shut eyes and puckered face, stood waiting for an answer. Receiving none, he turned towards his more familiar acquaintance.
Christopher's mother, he cried. Such a dear lady, such a worthy woman, so blessed in her honest son. How is Christopher's mother? Have change of air and scene improved her? Her little family too, and Christopher, do they thrive? Do they flourish? Are they growing into worthy citizens, eh?
Making his voice ascend in the scale with every succeeding question, Mr Quilp finished in a shrill squeak, and subsided into the panting look which was customary with him, and which, whether it were assumed or natural, had equally the effect of banishing all expression from his face, and rendering it, as far as it afforded any index to his mood or meaning, a perfect blank. Mr Quilp, said the single gentleman. The dwarf put his hand to his great flapped ear, and counterfeited the closest attention. We two have met before.
Surely, cried Quilp, nodding his head. Oh, surely, sir. Such an honour and pleasure. It's both. Christopher's mother, it's both, is not to be forgotten so soon. By no means.
You may remember that the day I arrived in London, and found the house to which I drove empty and deserted, I was directed by some of the neighbours to you, and waited upon you without stopping for rest or refreshment.
How precipitate that was, and yet what an earnest and vigorous measure, said Quilp, conferring with himself in imitation of his friend Mr Sampson Brass.
I found, said the single gentleman, you most unaccountably in possession of everything that had so recently belonged to another man, and that other man, who up to the time of your entering upon his property had been looked upon as affluent, reduced to sudden beggary, and driven from house and home.
We had warrant for what we did, my good sir, rejoined Quilp. We had our warrant. Don't say driven, either. He went of his own accord. Vanished in the night, sir.
No matter, said the single gentleman angrily. He was gone.
Yes, he was gone,
said Quilp with the same exasperating composure.
No doubt he was gone. The only question was where, and it's a question still.
Now, what am I to think, said the single gentleman sternly, regarding him, of you, who, plainly indisposed to give me any information then, nay, obviously holding back and sheltering yourself with all kinds of cunning, trickery, and evasion, are dogging my footsteps now?
I? Dogging?
cried Quilp.
Why are you not? returned his questioner, fretted into a state of the utmost irritation. "Were you not a few hours since 60 miles off, and in the chapel to which this good woman goes to say her prayers?"
She was there too, I think, said Quilp, still perfectly unmoved. I might say, if I was inclined to be rude, how do I know but you are dogging my footsteps? Yes, I was at chapel. What then? I've read in books that pilgrims were used to go to chapel before they went on journeys to put up petitions for their safe return. Wise men. Journeys are very perilous, especially outside the coach. Wheels come off, horses take fright, coachmen drive too fast, coaches overturn. I always go to chapel before I start on journeys. It's the last thing I do on such occasions, indeed.
That Quilp lied most heartily in this speech, it needed no very great penetration to discover, although for anything that he suffered to appear in his face, voice, or manner, he might have been clinging to the truth with the quiet constancy of a martyr. "In the name of all that's calculated to drive one crazy, man," said the unfortunate single gentleman, "have you not, for some reason of your own, taken upon yourself my errand? Don't you know with what object I have come here, and if you do know, can you throw no light upon it?"
You think I'm a conjurer, sir? Replied Quilp, shrugging up his shoulders. If I was, I should tell my own fortune, and make it.
"Ah! We have said all we need to say, I see," returned the other, throwing himself impatiently upon a sofa. "Pray leave us, if you please."
Willingly, returned Quilp. Most willingly. Christopher's mother, my good soul, farewell. A pleasant journey back, sir.
With these parting words, and with a grin upon his features altogether indescribable, but which seemed to be compounded of every monstrous grimace of which men or monkeys are capable, the dwarf slowly retreated and closed the door behind him.
Oh ho!
He said, when he had regained his own room, and sat himself down in a chair with his arms akimbo.
Oh ho! Are you there, my friend? Indeed.
Chuckling as though in very great glee, and recompensing himself for the restraint he had lately put upon his countenance by twisting it into all imaginable varieties of ugliness, Mr Quilp, rocking himself to and fro in his chair and nursing his left leg at the same time, fell into certain meditations, of which it may be necessary to relate the substance. First, he reviewed the circumstances which had led to his repairing to that spot, which were briefly these. Dropping in at Mr Sampson Brass's office on the previous evening, in the absence of that gentleman and his learned sister, he had lighted upon Mr Swiveller, who chanced at the moment to be sprinkling a glass of warm gin and water on the dust of the law, and to be moistening his clay, as the phrase goes, rather copiously. But as clay in the abstract, when too much moistened, becomes of a weak and uncertain consistency, breaking down in unexpected places, retaining impressions but faintly, and preserving no strength or steadiness of character, so Mr Swiveller's clay, having imbibed a considerable quantity of moisture, was in a very loose and slippery state, insomuch that the various ideas impressed upon it were fast losing their distinctive character and running into each other. It is not uncommon for human clay in this condition to value itself above all things upon its great prudence and sagacity, and Mr Swiveller, especially prizing himself upon these qualities, took occasion to remark that he had made strange discoveries in connection with the single gentleman who lodged above, which he had determined to keep within his own bosom, and which neither tortures nor cajolery should ever induce him to reveal. Of this determination Mr Quilp expressed his high approval, and setting himself in the same breath to goad Mr Swiveller on to further hints, soon made out that the single gentleman had been seen in communication with Kit, and that this was the secret which was never to be disclosed. Possessed of this piece of information, Mr Quilp directly supposed that the single gentleman above stairs must be the same individual who had waited on him,
and having assured himself by further inquiries that this surmise was correct, had no difficulty in arriving at the conclusion that the intent and object of his correspondence with Kit was the recovery of his old client and the child. Burning with curiosity to know what proceedings were afoot, he resolved to pounce upon Kit's mother as the person least able to resist his arts, and consequently the most likely to be entrapped into such revelations as he sought. So taking an abrupt leave of Mr Swiveller, he hurried to her house. The good woman being from home, he made inquiries of a neighbour, as Kit himself did soon afterwards, and being directed to the chapel, he took himself there, in order to waylay her at the conclusion of the service. He had not sat in the chapel more than a quarter of an hour, and with his eyes piously fixed upon the ceiling, was chuckling inwardly over the joke of his being there at all, when Kit himself appeared. Watchful as a lynx, one glance showed the dwarf that he had come on business. Absorbed in appearance, as we have seen, and feigning a profound abstraction, he noted every circumstance of his behaviour, and when he withdrew with his family, shot out after him. In fine, he traced them to the notary's house, learnt the destination of the carriage from one of the postilions, and knowing that a fast night coach started for the same place at the very hour which was on the point of striking from a street hard by, darted round to the coach office without more ado, and took his seat upon the roof. After passing and repassing the carriage on the road, and being passed and repassed by it sundry times in the course of the night, according as their stoppages were longer or shorter, or their rate of travelling varied, they reached the town almost together. Quilp kept the chaise in sight, mingled with the crowd, learnt the single gentleman's errand and its failure, and having possessed himself of all that it was material to know, hurried off, reached the inn before him, had the interview just now detailed, and shut himself up in the little room in which he hastily reviewed all these occurrences.
'You are there, are you, my friend?'
he repeated, greedily biting his nails.
'I am suspected and thrown aside, and Kit's the confidential agent, is he? I shall have to dispose of him, I fear. If we had come up with them this morning,' he continued, after a thoughtful pause, 'I was ready to prove a pretty good claim. I could have made my profit. But for these canting hypocrites, the lad and his mother, I could get this fiery gentleman as comfortably into my net as our old friend, our mutual friend, and chubby, rosy Nell. At the worst, it's a golden opportunity not to be lost. Let us find them first, and I'll find means of draining you of some of your superfluous cash, sir, while there are prison bars and bolts and locks to keep your friend or kinsman safely. I hate your virtuous people,' said the dwarf, throwing off a bumper of brandy and smacking his lips. 'Ugh! I hate them every one.' This was not a mere empty vaunt, but a deliberate avowal of his real sentiments. For Mr Quilp, who loved nobody, had by little and little come to hate everybody nearly or remotely connected with his ruined client. The old man himself, because he had been able to deceive him and elude his vigilance; the child, because she was the object of Mrs Quilp's commiseration and constant self-reproach; the single gentleman, because of his unconcealed aversion to himself; Kit and his mother, most mortally for the reasons shown. Above and beyond that general feeling of opposition to them, which would have been inseparable from his ravenous desire to enrich himself by these altered circumstances, Daniel Quilp hated them every one. In this amiable mood, Mr Quilp enlivened himself and his hatreds with more brandy, and then, changing his quarters, withdrew to an obscure alehouse, under cover of which seclusion he instituted all possible inquiries that might lead to the discovery of the old man and his grandchild. But all was in vain. Not the slightest trace or clue could be obtained. They had left the town by night. No one had seen them go. No one had met them on the road. The driver of no coach, cart, or waggon had seen any travellers answering their description. Nobody had fallen in with them or heard of them. Convinced at last that for the present all such attempts were hopeless, he appointed 2 or 3 scouts,
with promises of large rewards in case of their forwarding him any intelligence, and returned to London by next day's coach. It was some gratification to Mr Quilp to find, as he took his place upon the roof, that Kit's mother was alone inside, from which circumstance he derived in the course of the journey much cheerfulness of spirit, inasmuch as her solitary condition enabled him to terrify her with many extraordinary annoyances, such as hanging over the side of the coach at the risk of his life, and staring in with his great goggle eyes, which seemed in hers the more horrible from his face being upside down, dodging her in this way from one window to another, getting nimbly down whenever they changed horses, and thrusting his head in at the window with a dismal squint, which ingenious tortures had such an effect upon Mrs Nubbles that she was quite unable for the time to resist the belief that Mr Quilp did, in his own person, represent and embody that evil power who was so vigorously attacked at Little Bethel, and who, by reason of her backslidings in respect of Astleys and oysters, was now frolicsome and rampant. Kit, having been apprised by letter of his mother's intended return, was waiting for her at the coach office, and great was his surprise when he saw, leering over the coachman's shoulder like some familiar demon, invisible to all eyes but his, the well-known face of Quilp.
'How are you, Christopher?' croaked the dwarf from the coach-top. 'All right, Christopher? Mother's inside.' 'Why, how did he come here, mother?' whispered Kit. 'I don't know how he came, or why, my dear,' rejoined Mrs Nubbles, dismounting with her son's assistance, 'but he has been a terrifying of me out of my seven senses all this blessed day.' 'He has?' cried Kit. 'You wouldn't believe it, that you wouldn't,' replied his mother. 'But don't say a word to him, for I really don't believe he's human. Hush! Don't turn round as if I was talking of him, but he's a squinting at me now in the full blaze of the coach lamp, quite awful.'
In spite of his mother's injunction, Kit turned sharply round to look. Mr Quilp was serenely gazing at the stars, quite absorbed in celestial contemplation.
'Oh, he's the artfullest creature!' cried Mrs Nubbles. 'But come away. Don't speak to him for the world.' 'Yes, I will, mother. What nonsense! I say, sir.'
Mr Quilp affected to start, and looked smilingly round.
'You let my mother alone, will you?' said Kit. 'How dare you tease a poor lone woman like her, making her miserable and melancholy as if she hadn't got enough to make her so without you? Ain't you ashamed of yourself, you little monster?' 'Monster!' said Quilp inwardly, with a smile. 'Ugliest dwarf that could be seen anywhere for a penny. Monster! Ah! You show her any of your impudence again,' resumed Kit, shouldering the bandbox, 'and I tell you what, Mr Quilp, I won't bear with you any more. You have no right to do it. I'm sure we never interfered with you. This isn't the first time, and if ever you worry or frighten her again, you'll oblige me, though I shall be very sorry to do it on account of your size, to beat you.'
Quilp said not a word in reply, but walking so close to Kit as to bring his eyes within 2 or 3 inches of his face, looked fixedly at him, retreated a little distance without averting his gaze, approached again, again withdrew, and so on for half a dozen times, like a head in a phantasmagoria. Kit stood his ground, as if in expectation of an immediate assault, but finding that nothing came of these gestures, snapped his fingers and walked away, his mother dragging him off as fast as she could, and, even in the midst of his news of little Jacob and the baby, looking anxiously over her shoulder to see if Quilp were following. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 49. Kit's mother might have spared herself the trouble of looking back so often, for nothing was further from Mr Quilp's thoughts than any intention of pursuing her and her son, or renewing the quarrel with which they had parted. He went his way, whistling from time to time some fragments of a tune, and with a face quite tranquil and composed, jogged pleasantly towards home, entertaining himself as he went with visions of the fears and terrors of Mrs Quilp, who, having received no intelligence of him for 3 whole days and 2 nights, and having had no previous notice of his absence, was doubtless by that time in a state of distraction, and constantly fainting away with anxiety and grief. This facetious probability was so congenial to the dwarf's humour, and so exquisitely amusing to him, that he laughed as he went along until the tears ran down his cheeks, and more than once, when he found himself in a by-street, vented his delight in a shrill scream, which, greatly terrifying any lonely passenger who happened to be walking on before him expecting nothing so little, increased his mirth, and made him remarkably cheerful and light-hearted. In this happy flow of spirits, Mr Quilp reached Tower Hill, when, gazing up at the window of his own sitting-room, he thought he descried more light than is usual in a house of mourning. Drawing nearer, and listening attentively, he could hear several voices in earnest conversation, among which he could distinguish not only those of his wife and mother-in-law, but the tongues of men.
'Ha!' cried the jealous dwarf. 'What's this? Do they entertain visitors while I'm away?'
A smothered cough from above was the reply. He felt in his pockets for his latch-key, but had forgotten it. There was no resource but to knock at the door.
'A light in the passage,' said Quilp, peeping through the keyhole. 'A very soft knock, and by your leave, my lady, I may yet steal upon you unawares. So ho!'
A very low and gentle rap received no answer from within, but after a second application to the knocker, no louder than the first, the door was softly opened by the boy from the wharf, whom Quilp instantly gagged with one hand and dragged into the street with the other.
'You'll throw me, master,'
whispered the boy.
'Let go, will you?'
'Who's upstairs, you dog?'
retorted Quilp in the same tone.
'Tell me, and don't speak above your breath, or I'll choke you in good earnest.'
The boy could only point to the window, and reply with a stifled giggle, expressive of such intense enjoyment that Quilp clutched him by the throat, and might have carried his threat into execution, or at least have made very good progress towards that end, but for the boy's nimbly extricating himself from his grasp, and fortifying himself behind the nearest post, at which, after some fruitless attempts to catch him by the hair of the head, his master was obliged to come to a parley.
'Will you answer me?' said Quilp. 'What's going on above?'
You won't let no one speak,'
replied the boy.
They think you're dead.
'Dead?'
replied Quilp, relaxing into a grim laugh himself.
'Now, do they? Do they really, you dog?'
'They think you're drowned,'
replied the boy, who in his malicious nature had a strong infusion of his master.
'You was last seen on the brink of the wharf, and they think you tumbled over.'
The prospect of playing the spy under such delicious circumstances, and of disappointing them all by walking in alive, gave more delight to Quilp than the greatest stroke of good fortune could possibly have inspired him with. He was no less tickled than his hopeful assistant, and they both stood for some seconds, grinning and gasping and wagging their heads at each other on either side of the post, like an unmatchable pair of Chinese idols.
'Not a word,'
said Quilp, making towards the door on tiptoe.
'Not a sound. Not so much as a creaking board, or a stumble against a cobweb. Drowned, eh, Mrs Quilp? Drowned!'
So saying, he blew out the candle, kicked off his shoes, and groped his way upstairs, leaving his delighted young friend in an ecstasy of summersets on the pavement. The bedroom door on the staircase being unlocked, Mr Quilp slipped in, and planted himself behind the door of communication between that chamber and the sitting-room, which, standing ajar to render both more airy, and having a very convenient chink of which he had often availed himself for purposes of espial, and had indeed enlarged with his pocket-knife, enabled him not only to hear but to see distinctly what was passing. Applying his eye to this convenient place, he descried Mr Brass seated at the table with pen, ink, and paper, and the case bottle of rum, his own case bottle, and his own particular Jamaica, convenient to his hand, with hot water, fragrant lemons, white lump sugar, and all things fitting, from which choice materials Sampson, by no means insensible to their claims upon his attention, had compounded a mighty glass of punch reeking hot, which he was at that very moment stirring up with a teaspoon, and contemplating with looks in which a faint assumption of sentimental regret struggled but weakly with a bland and comfortable joy. At the same table, with both her elbows upon it, was Mrs Jiniwin, no longer sipping other people's punch feloniously with teaspoons, but taking deep draughts from a jorum of her own, while her daughter, not exactly with ashes on her head or sackcloth on her back, but preserving a very decent and becoming appearance of sorrow nevertheless, was reclining in an easy chair and soothing her grief with a smaller allowance of the same glib liquid. There were also present a couple of waterside men, bearing between them certain machines called drags. Even these fellows were accommodated with a stiff glass apiece, and as they drank with a great relish, and were naturally of a red-nosed, pimple-faced, convivial look, their presence rather increased than detracted from that decided appearance of comfort which was the great characteristic of the party.
'If I could poison that dear old lady's rum and water,' murmured Quilp, 'I'd die happy.'
'Ah!' said Mr Brass, breaking the silence and raising his eyes to the ceiling with a sigh. 'Who knows but he may be looking down upon us now? Who knows but he may be surveying of us from somewheres or another, and contemplating us with a watchful eye? Oh Lor!' Here Mr Brass stopped to drink half his punch, and then resumed, looking at the other half as he spoke, with a dejected smile. 'I can almost fancy,' said the lawyer, shaking his head, 'that I see his eye glistening down at the very bottom of my liquor. When shall we look upon his like again? Never, never. 1 minute we are here,' holding his tumbler before his eyes, 'the next we are there,' gulping down its contents and striking himself emphatically a little below the chest, 'in the silent tomb. To think that I should be drinking his very rum! It seems like a dream.' With the view, no doubt, of testing the reality of his position, Mr Brass pushed his tumbler as he spoke towards Mrs Jiniwin for the purpose of being replenished, and turned towards the attendant mariners. 'The search has been quite unsuccessful, then?' 'Quite, master. But I should say, if he turns up anywhere, he'll come ashore somewhere about Greenwich tomorrow, at ebb tide. Eh, mate?' The other gentleman assented, observing that he was expected at the hospital, and that several pensioners would be ready to receive him whenever he arrived. 'Then we have nothing for it but resignation,' said Mr Brass. 'Nothing but resignation and expectation. It would be a comfort to have his body. It would be a dreary comfort.'
'Oh, beyond a doubt,' assented Mrs Jiniwin hastily. 'If we once had that, we should be quite sure.'
'With regard to the descriptive advertisement,' said Sampson Brass, taking up his pen, 'it is a melancholy pleasure to recall his traits. Respecting his legs, now.'
'Crooked, certainly,'
said Mrs Jiniwin. 'Do you think they were crooked?' said Brass, in an insinuating tone. 'I think I see them now, coming up the street, very wide apart,
in nankeen pantaloons a little shrunk and without straps. Ah, what a vale of tears we live in! Do we say crooked?'
'I think they were a little so,' observed Mrs Quilp with a sob.
'Legs crooked,' said Brass, writing as he spoke. 'Large head, short body, legs crooked.'
'Very crooked,'
suggested Mrs Jiniwin.
'We'll not say very crooked, ma'am,'
said Brass piously.
'Let us not bear hard upon the weaknesses of the deceased. He is gone, ma'am, to where his legs will never come in question. We will content ourselves with crooked, Mrs Jiniwin.' 'I thought you wanted the truth,' said the old lady. 'That's all.' 'Bless your eyes, how I love you!' muttered Quilp. 'There she goes again. Nothing but punch.'
'This is an occupation,' said the lawyer, laying down his pen and emptying his glass, 'which seems to bring him before my eyes like the ghost of Hamlet's father and the very clothes that he wore on workadays. His coat, his waistcoat, his shoes and stockings, his trousers, his hat, his wit and humour, his pathos and his umbrella, all come before me like visions of my youth. His linen,' said Mr Brass, smiling fondly at the wall, 'his linen, which was always of a particular colour, for such was his whim and fancy. How plain I see his linen now!'
'You had better go on, sir,'
said Mrs Jiniwin impatiently. 'True, ma'am, true,' cried Mr Brass. 'Our faculties must not freeze with grief. I'll trouble you for a little more of that, ma'am. A question now arises with relation to his nose.'
'Flat,'
said Mrs Jiniwin.
'Aquiline,'
cried Quilp, thrusting in his head and striking the feature with his fist.
'Aquiline, you hag! Do you see it? Do you call this flat? Do you? Eh?'
'Oh, capital, capital!' shouted Brass from the mere force of habit. 'Excellent! How very good he is! He's a most remarkable man, so extremely whimsical, such an amazing power of taking people by surprise.' Quilp paid no regard whatever to these compliments, nor to the dubious and frightened look into which the lawyer gradually subsided, nor to the shrieks of his wife and mother-in-law, nor to the latter's running from the room, nor to the former's fainting away. Keeping his eye fixed on Sampson Brass, he walked up to the table, and beginning with his glass, drank off the contents and went regularly round until he had emptied the other two, when he seized the case bottle, and hugging it under his arm, surveyed him with a most extraordinary leer.
'Not yet, Sampson,' said Quilp. 'Not just yet.'
'Oh, very good indeed!' cried Brass, recovering his spirits a little. 'Ha ha! Oh, exceedingly good! There's not another man alive who could carry it off like that. A most difficult position to carry off. But he has such a flow of good humour, such an amazing flow.'
'Good night,'
said the dwarf, nodding expressively. 'Good night, sir, good night!' cried the lawyer, retreating backwards towards the door. 'This is a joyful occasion indeed, extremely joyful. Ha 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 ha! Oh, very rich indeed, remarkably so!' Waiting until Mr Brass's ejaculations died away in the distance, for he continued to pour them out all the way downstairs, Quilp advanced towards the two men, who yet lingered in a kind of stupid amazement.
'Have you been dragging the river all day, gentlemen?' said the dwarf, holding the door open with great politeness.
'And yesterday too, master.'
'Dear me! You've had a deal of trouble. Pray consider everything yours that you find upon the body. Good night.'
The men looked at each other,
but had evidently no inclination to argue the point just then, and shuffled out of the room. The speedy clearance effected, Quilp locked the doors, and still embracing the case bottle with shrugged up shoulders and folded arms, stood looking at his insensible wife like a dismounted nightmare. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 50. Matrimonial differences are usually discussed by the parties concerned in the form of dialogue in which the lady bears at least her full half share. Those of Mr. and Mrs. Quilp, however, were an exception to the general rule. The remarks which they occasioned being limited to a long soliloquy on the part of the gentleman, with perhaps a few deprecatory observations from the lady, not extending beyond a trembling monosyllable uttered at long intervals, and in a very submissive and humble tone. On the present occasion, Mrs. Quilp did not for a long time venture even on this gentle defence, but when she had recovered from her fainting fit, sat in a tearful silence, meekly listening to the reproaches of her lord and master. Of these Mr. Quilp delivered himself with the utmost animation and rapidity, and with so many distortions of limb and feature, that even his wife, although tolerably well accustomed to his proficiency in these respects, was well nigh beside herself with alarm. But the Jamaica rum, and the joy of having occasioned a heavy disappointment, by degrees cooled Mr. Quilp's wrath, which from being at savage heat dropped slowly to the bantering or chuckling point, at which it steadily remained.
'So you thought I was dead and gone, did you?' said Quilp. 'You thought you were a widow, eh? You jade!'
'Indeed, Quilp,' returned his wife, 'I'm very sorry.'
'Who doubts it?' cried the dwarf. 'You very sorry? To be sure you are. Who doubts that you're very sorry?'
'I don't mean sorry that you have come home again alive and well,' said his wife, 'but sorry that I should have been led into such a belief. I am glad to see you, Quilp. Indeed I am.'
In truth, Mrs. Quilp did seem a great deal more glad to behold her lord than might have been expected, and did evince a degree of interest in his safety, which, all things considered, was rather unaccountable. Upon Quilp, however, this circumstance made no impression, farther than as it moved him to snap his fingers close to his wife's eyes, with divers grins of triumph and derision.
'How could you go away so long without saying a word to me, or letting me hear of you, or know anything about you?' asked the poor little woman, sobbing. 'How could you be so cruel, Quilp?'
'How could I be so cruel? Cruel!' cried the dwarf. 'Because I was in the humour. I'm in the humour now. I shall be cruel when I like. I'm going away again.'
'Not again?'
'Yes, again. I'm going away now. I'm off directly. I mean to go and live wherever the fancy seizes me, at the wharf, at the counting-house, and be a jolly bachelor. You are a widow in anticipation. Damn!' screamed the dwarf. 'I'll be a bachelor in earnest.'
'You can't be serious, Quilp,'
sobbed his wife.
'I tell you,' said the dwarf, exulting in his project, 'that I'll be a bachelor, a devil-may-care bachelor, and I'll have my bachelor's hall at the counting-house, and at such times come near it if you dare. And mind, too, that I don't pounce in upon you at unseasonable hours again, for I'll be a spy upon you, and come and go like a mole or a weasel. Tom Scott, where's Tom Scott?' 'Here I am, master!' cried the voice of the boy, as Quilp threw up the window. 'Wait there, you dog,' returned the dwarf, 'to carry a bachelor's portmanteau. Pack it up, Mrs Quilp. Knock up the dear old lady to help. Knock her up. Halloa there! Hallo!'
With these exclamations, Mr Quilp caught up the poker, and hurrying to the door of the good lady's sleeping closet, beat upon it therewith until she awoke in inexpressible terror, thinking that her amiable son-in-law surely intended to murder her in justification of the legs she had slandered. Impressed with this idea, she was no sooner fairly awake than she screamed violently, and would have quickly precipitated herself out of the window and through a neighbouring skylight if her daughter had not hastened in to undeceive her and implore her assistance. Somewhat reassured by her account of the service she was required to render, Mrs Jiniwin made her appearance in a flannel dressing-gown, and both mother and daughter, trembling with terror and cold, for the night was now far advanced, obeyed Mr Quilp's directions in submissive silence. Prolonging his preparations as much as possible for their greater comfort, that eccentric gentleman superintended the packing of his wardrobe, and having added to it with his own hands a plate, knife and fork, spoon, teacup and saucer, and other small household matters of that nature, strapped up the portmanteau, took it on his shoulders, and actually marched off without another word, and with the case bottle, which he had never once put down, still tightly clasped under his arm. Consigning his heavier burden to the care of Tom Scott when he reached the street, taking a dram from the bottle for his own encouragement, and giving the boy a rap on the head with it as a small taste for himself, Quilp very deliberately led the way to the wharf, and reached it at between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning.
'Snug,'
said Quilp, when he had groped his way to the wooden counting-house, and opened the door with a key he carried about with him.
'Beautifully snug. Call me at 8, you dog.'
With no more formal leave-taking or explanation, he clutched the portmanteau, shut the door on his attendant, and climbing on the desk, and rolling himself up as round as a hedgehog in an old boat cloak, fell fast asleep. Being roused in the morning at the appointed time, and roused with difficulty after his late fatigues, Quilp instructed Tom Scott to make a fire in the yard of sundry pieces of old timber, and to prepare some coffee for breakfast, for the better furnishing of which repast he entrusted him with certain small moneys, to be expended in the purchase of hot rolls, butter, sugar, Yarmouth bloaters, and other articles of housekeeping, so that in a few minutes a savoury meal was smoking on the board. With this substantial comfort, the dwarf regaled himself to his heart's content, and being highly satisfied with this free and gipsy mode of life, which he had often meditated as offering, whenever he chose to avail himself of it, an agreeable freedom from the restraints of matrimony, and a choice means of keeping Mrs Quilp and her mother in a state of incessant agitation and suspense, bestirred himself to improve his retreat and render it more commodious and comfortable. With this view he issued forth to a place hard by where sea stores were sold, purchased a second-hand hammock, and had it slung in seaman-like fashion from the ceiling of the counting-house. He also caused to be erected in the same mouldy cabin an old ship's stove with a rusty funnel to carry the smoke through the roof, and these arrangements completed, surveyed them with ineffable delight.
'I've got a country house like Robinson Crusoe,' said the dwarf, ogling the accommodations. 'A solitary, sequestered, desolate island sort of spot, where I can be quite alone when I have business on hand, and be secure from all spies and listeners. Nobody near me here but rats, and they are fine, stealthy, secret fellows. I shall be as merry as a grig among these gentry. I'll look out for one like Christopher, and poison him. Business though, business. We must be mindful of business in the midst of pleasure. The time has flown this morning, I declare.'
Enjoining Tom Scott to await his return, and not to stand upon his head, or throw a somerset, or so much as walk upon his hands meanwhile, on pain of lingering torments, the dwarf threw himself into a boat, and crossing to the other side of the river, and then speeding away on foot, reached Mr Swiveller's usual house of entertainment in Bevis Marks, just as that gentleman sat down alone to dinner in its dusky parlour.
'Dick,'
said the dwarf, thrusting his head in at the door,
'my pet, my pupil, the apple of my eye, hey, hey, hey!' 'Oh, you're there, are you?
returned Mr Swiveller. 'How are you?'
'How's Dick?' retorted Quilp. 'How's the cream of clerkship, eh?'
'Why, rather sour, sir,' replied Mr Swiveller. 'Beginning to border upon cheesiness, in fact.'
'What's the matter?' said the dwarf, advancing. 'Has Sally proved unkind? Of all the girls that are so smart, there's none like hey, Dick?'
'Certainly not,' replied Mr Swiveller, eating his dinner with great gravity. 'None like her. She's the Sphinx of private life, is Sally B.'
'You're out of spirits,' said Quilp, drawing up a chair. 'What's the matter?'
'The law don't agree with me,' returned Dick. 'It isn't moist enough, and there's too much confinement. I've been thinking of running away.'
'Bah!' said the dwarf. 'Where would you run to, Dick?'
'I don't know,' returned Mr Swiveller. 'Towards Highgate, I suppose. Perhaps the bells might strike up "Turn again, Swiveller, Lord Mayor of London." Whittington's name was Dick. I wish cats were scarcer.' Quilp looked at his companion with his eyes screwed up into a comical expression of curiosity, and patiently awaited his further explanation. Upon which, however, Mr Swiveller appeared in no hurry to enter, as he ate a very long dinner in profound silence, finally pushed away his plate, threw himself back into his chair, folded his arms, and stared ruefully at the fire, in which some ends of cigars were smoking on their own account, and sending up a fragrant odour. 'Perhaps you'd like a bit of cake?' said Dick, at last turning to the dwarf. 'You're quite welcome to it. You ought to be, for it's of your making.'
'What do you mean?' said Quilp.
Mr Swiveller replied by taking from his pocket a small and very greasy parcel, slowly unfolding it, and displaying a little slab of plum cake, extremely indigestible in appearance, and bordered with a paste of white sugar 1.5 inches deep. 'What should you say this was?' demanded Mr Swiveller.
'It looks like bride cake,' replied the dwarf, grinning.
'And whose should you say it was?' inquired Mr Swiveller, rubbing the pastry against his nose with a dreadful calmness. 'Whose?'
'Not.'
'Yes,' said Dick. 'The same. You needn't mention her name. There's no such name now. Her name is Cheggs now. Sophy Cheggs. Yet loved I as man never loved that hadn't wooden legs. And my heart is breaking for the love of Sophy Cheggs.' With this extemporary adaptation of a popular ballad to the distressing circumstances of his own case, Mr Swiveller folded up the parcel again, beat it very flat between the palms of his hands, thrust it into his breast, buttoned his coat over it, and folded his arms upon the whole. 'Now, I hope you're satisfied, sir,' said Dick, 'and I hope Fred's satisfied. You went partners in the mischief, and I hope you like it. This is the triumph I was to have, is it? It's like the old country dance of that name, where there are 2 gentlemen to 1 lady, and one has her, and the other hasn't, but comes limping up behind to make out the figure. But it's destiny, and mine's a crusher.' Disguising his secret joy in Mr Swiveller's defeat, Daniel Quilp adopted the surest means of soothing him by ringing the bell and ordering in a supply of rosy wine, that is to say, of its usual representative, which he put about with great alacrity, calling upon Mr Swiveller to pledge him in various toasts derisive of Cheggs, and eulogistic of the happiness of single men. Such was their impression on Mr Swiveller, coupled with the reflection that no man could oppose his destiny, that in a very short space of time his spirits rose surprisingly, and he was enabled to give the dwarf an account of the receipt of the cake, which, it appeared, had been brought to Bevis Marks by the 2 surviving Miss Wackleses in person, and delivered at the office door with much giggling and joyfulness.
'Ha!' said Quilp. 'It will be our turn to giggle soon. And that reminds me. You spoke of young Trent. Where is he?' Mr Swiveller explained that his respectable friend had recently accepted a responsible situation in a locomotive gaming house, and was at that time absent on a professional tour among the adventurous spirits of Great Britain. 'That's unfortunate,' said the dwarf. for I came, in fact, to ask you about him. A thought has occurred to me, Dick. Your friend over the way—' 'Which friend?' 'In the first floor.' 'Yes?' 'Your friend in the first floor, Dick, may know him.' 'No, he don't,' said Mr Swiveller, shaking his head. 'Don't?' 'No, because he has never seen him,' rejoined Quilp. 'But if we were to bring them together, who knows, Dick, but Fred, properly introduced, would serve his turn almost as well as little Nell or her grandfather? Who knows but it might make the young fellow's fortune, and, through him, yours, eh?'
'Why, the fact is, you see,' said Mr Swiveller, 'that they have been brought together.'
'Have been?'
cried the dwarf, looking suspiciously at his companion.
'Through whose means?'
'Through mine,' said Dick, slightly confused. 'Didn't I mention it to you the last time you called over yonder?'
'You know you didn't,'
returned the dwarf. 'I believe you're right,' said Dick. 'No, I didn't, I recollect. Oh yes, I brought 'em together that very day. It was Fred's suggestion.'
'And what came of it?'
'Why, instead of my friend's bursting into tears when he knew who Fred was, embracing him kindly and telling him that he was his grandfather, or his grandmother in disguise, which we fully expected, he flew into a tremendous passion, called him all manner of names, said it was in a great measure his fault that little Nell and the old gentleman had ever been brought to poverty, didn't hint at our taking anything to drink, and in short, rather turned us out of the room than otherwise.'
'That's strange,' said the dwarf, musing.
'So we remarked to each other at the time,' returned Dick coolly, 'but quite true.' Quilp was plainly staggered by this intelligence, over which he brooded for some time in moody silence, often raising his eyes to Mr Swiveller's face and sharply scanning its expression. As he could read in it, however, no additional information or anything to lead him to believe he had spoken falsely, and as Mr Swiveller, left to his own meditations, sighed deeply and was evidently growing maudlin on the subject of Mrs Cheggs, the dwarf soon broke up the conference and took his departure, leaving the bereaved one to his melancholy ruminations.
'Have been brought together, eh?' said the dwarf, as he walked the streets alone. 'My friend has stolen a march upon me. It led him to nothing, and therefore is no great matter, save in the intention. I'm glad he has lost his mistress. The blockhead mustn't leave the law at present. I'm sure of him where he is, whenever I want him for my own purpose, and besides, he's a good unconscious spy on brass, and tells in his cups all that he sees and hears. You're useful to me, Dick, and cost nothing but a little treating now and then. I am not sure that it may not be worth while, before long, to take credit with the stranger, Dick, by discovering your designs upon the child. But for the present, we'll remain the best friends in the world, with your good leave.'
Pursuing these thoughts, and gasping as he went along after his own peculiar fashion, Mr Quilp once more crossed the Thames and shut himself up in his bachelor's hall, which, by reason of its newly erected chimney depositing the smoke inside the room and carrying none of it off, was not quite so agreeable as more fastidious people might have desired. Such inconveniences, however, instead of disgusting the dwarf with his new abode, rather suited his humour, so after dining luxuriously from the public house, he lighted his pipe and smoked against the chimney until nothing of him was visible through the mist but a pair of red and highly inflamed eyes, with sometimes a dim vision of his head and face, as in a violent fit of coughing he slightly stirred the smoke, and scattered the heavy wreaths by which they were obscured. In the midst of this atmosphere, which must infallibly have smothered any other man, Mr Quilp passed the evening with great cheerfulness, solacing himself at all time with the pipe and the case bottle, and occasionally entertaining himself with a melodious howl, intended for a song, but bearing not the faintest resemblance to any scrap of any piece of music, vocal or instrumental, ever invented by man. Thus he amused himself until nearly midnight, when he turned into his hammock with the utmost satisfaction. The first sound that met his ears in the morning, as he half opened his eyes, and finding himself so unusually near the ceiling, entertained a drowsy idea that he must have been transformed into a fly or bluebottle in the course of the night, was that of a stifled sobbing and weeping in the room. Peeping cautiously over the side of his hammock, he descried Mrs Quilp, to whom, after contemplating her for some time in silence, he communicated a violent start by suddenly yelling out, "Halloa!"
Oh, Quilp!
cried his poor little wife, looking up.
Oh, you frighten me.
I meant to, you jade, returned the dwarf. What do you want here? I'm dead, ain't I?
Oh, please come home. Do come home, said Mrs Quilp, sobbing. We'll never do so any more, Quilp. And after all, it was only a mistake that grew out of our anxiety.
Out of your anxiety, grinned the dwarf. Yes, I know that. Out of your anxiety for my death. I shall come home when I please, I tell you. I shall come home when I please and go when I please. I'll be a will-o'-the-wisp. Now here, now there, dancing about you always, starting up when you least expect me, and keeping you in a constant state of restlessness and irritation. Will you be gone?
Mrs Quilp durst only make a gesture of entreaty.
I tell you no, cried the dwarf. No. If you dare to come here again, unless you're sent for, I'll keep watchdogs in the yard that'll growl and bite. I'll have man-traps, cunningly altered and improved for catching women. I'll have spring guns that shall explode when you tread upon the wires and blow you into little pieces. Will you be gone?
Do forgive me. Do come back, said his wife earnestly.
No, roared Quilp. Not till my own good time, and then I'll return again as often as I choose, and be accountable to nobody for my goings or comings. You see the door there. Will you go?
Mr Quilp delivered this last command in such a very energetic voice, and moreover accompanied it with such a sudden gesture, indicative of an intention to spring out of his hammock, and, night-capped as he was, bear his wife home again through the public streets, that she sped away like an arrow. Her worthy lord stretched his neck and eyes until she had crossed the yard, and then, not at all sorry to have had this opportunity of carrying his point, and asserting the sanctity of his castle, fell into an immoderate fit of laughter, and laid himself down to sleep again. End of chapter 50. Chapter 51 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 51. The bland and open-hearted proprietor of Bachelor's Hall slept on amidst the congenial accompaniments of rain, mud, dirt, damp, fog, and rats, until late in the day, when, summoning his valet Tom Scott to assist him to rise, and to prepare breakfast, he quitted his couch and made his toilet. This duty performed, and his repast ended, he again betook himself to Bevis Marks. This visit was not intended for Mr Swiveller, but for his friend and employer, Mr Sampson Brass. Both gentlemen, however, were from home, nor was the life and light of law, Miss Sally, at her post either. The fact of their joint desertion of the office was made known to all comers by a scrap of paper in the handwriting of Mr Swiveller, which was attached to the bell-handle, and which, giving the reader no clue to the time of day when it was first posted, furnished him with the rather vague and unsatisfactory information that that gentleman would return in an hour. "There's a servant, I suppose," said the dwarf, knocking at the house door. "She'll do." After a sufficiently long interval, the door was opened, and a small voice immediately accosted him with,
Oh, please, will you leave a card or message?
Eh?
said the dwarf, looking down, it was something quite new to him, upon the small servant. To this the child, conducting her conversation as upon the occasion of her first interview with Mr Swiveller, again replied,
Oh, please, will you leave a card or message?
I'll write a note, said the dwarf, pushing past her into the office. And mind your master has it directly he comes home. So Mr Quilp climbed up to the top of a tall stool to write the note, and the small servant, carefully tutored for such emergencies, looked on with her eyes wide open, ready if he so much as abstracted a wafer to rush into the street and give the alarm to the police. As Mr Quilp folded his note, which was soon written, being a very short one, he encountered the gaze of the small servant. He looked at her, long and earnestly. How are you?
said the dwarf, moistening a wafer with horrible grimaces. The small servant, perhaps frightened by his looks, returned no audible reply, but it appeared from the motion of her lips that she was inwardly repeating the same form of expression concerning the note or message.
Do they use you ill here? Is your mistress a Tartar? said Quilp with a chuckle.
In reply to the last interrogation, the small servant, with a look of infinite cunning mingled with fear, screwed up her mouth very tight and round, and nodded violently. Whether there was anything in the peculiar slyness of her action which fascinated Mr Quilp, or anything in the expression of her features at the moment which attracted his attention for some other reason, or whether it merely occurred to him as a pleasant whim to stare the small servant out of countenance, certain it is that he planted his elbows square and firmly on the desk, and squeezing up his cheeks with his hands, looked at her fixedly.
Where do you come from?
he said after a long pause, stroking his chin.
I don't know.
What's your name?
Nothing.
Nonsense, retorted Quilp. What does your mistress call you when she wants you?
A little devil,
said the child. She added in the same breath, as if fearful of any further questioning,
but please, will you leave a card or message?
These unusual answers might naturally have provoked some more inquiries. Quilp, however, without uttering another word, withdrew his eyes from the small servant, stroked his chin more thoughtfully than before, and then, bending over the note as if to direct it with scrupulous and hair-breadth nicety, looked at her, covertly but very narrowly, from under his bushy eyebrows. The result of this secret survey was, that he shaded his face with his hands, and laughed slyly and noiselessly until every vein in it was swollen almost to bursting. Pulling his hat over his brow to conceal his mirth and its effects, he tossed the letter to the child, and hastily withdrew. Once in the street, moved by some secret impulse, he laughed, and held his sides, and laughed again, and tried to peer through the dusty area railings, as if to catch another glimpse of the child, until he was quite tired out. At last he travelled back to the wilderness, which was within rifle shot of his bachelor retreat, and ordered tea in the wooden summer-house that afternoon for 3 persons, an invitation to Miss Sally Brass and her brother to partake of that entertainment at that place, having been the object both of his journey and his note. It was not precisely the kind of weather in which people usually take tea in summer-houses, far less in summer-houses in an advanced state of decay, and overlooking the slimy banks of a great river at low water. Nevertheless, it was in this choice retreat that Mr Quilp ordered a cold collation to be prepared, and it was beneath its cracked and leaky roof that he, in due course of time, received Mr Sampson and his sister Sally.
You're fond of the beauties of nature, said Quilp with a grin. Is this charming, Brass? Is it unusual, unsophisticated, primitive?
It's delightful indeed, sir, replied the lawyer.
Cool, said Quilp. Not particularly so, I think, sir, rejoined Brass, with his teeth chattering in his head. Perhaps a little damp and aguish, said Quilp.
Just damp enough to be cheerful, sir, rejoined Brass.
Nothing more, sir, nothing more. And Sally,' said the delighted dwarf, 'does she like it?'
'She'll like it better,' returned that strong-minded lady, 'when she has tea. So let us have it, and don't bother.'
'Sweet Sally!'
cried Quilp, extending his arms as if about to embrace her.
'Gentle, charming, overwhelming Sally!'
'He's a very remarkable man indeed,' soliloquized Mr Brass. 'He's quite a troubadour, you know, quite a troubadour.' These complimentary expressions were uttered in a somewhat absent and distracted manner, for the unfortunate lawyer, besides having a bad cold in his head, had got wet in coming, and would have willingly borne some pecuniary sacrifice if he could have shifted his present raw quarters to a warm room, and dried himself at a fire. Quilp, however, who beyond the gratification of his demon whims owed Sampson some acknowledgment of the part he had played in the mourning scene of which he had been a hidden witness, marked these symptoms of uneasiness with a delight past all expression, and derived from them a secret joy which the costliest banquet could never have afforded him. It is worthy of remark, too, as illustrating a little feature in the character of Miss Sally Brass, that although on her own account she would have borne the discomforts of the wilderness with a very ill grace, and would probably indeed have walked off before the tea appeared, she no sooner beheld the latent uneasiness and misery of her brother than she developed a grim satisfaction, and began to enjoy herself after her own manner. Though the wet came stealing through the roof and trickling down upon their heads, Miss Brass uttered no complaint, but presided over the tea equipage with imperturbable composure; while Mr Quilp, in his uproarious hospitality, seated himself upon an empty beer barrel, vaunted the place as the most beautiful and comfortable in the three kingdoms, and elevating his glass, drank to their next merry meeting in that jovial spot; and Mr Brass, with the rain plashing down into his teacup, made a dismal attempt to pluck up his spirits and appear at his ease; and Tom Scott, who was in waiting at the door under an old umbrella, exulted in his agonies, and bade fair to split his sides with laughing. While all this was passing, Miss Sally Brass, unmindful of the wet which dripped down upon her own feminine person and fair apparel, sat placidly behind the tea board, erect and grisly, contemplating the unhappiness of her brother with a mind at ease, and content, in her amiable disregard of self, to sit there all night, witnessing the torments which his avaricious and grovelling nature compelled him to endure, and forbade him to resent. And this, it must be observed, or the illustration would be incomplete, although in a business point of view she had the strongest sympathy with Mr Sampson, and would have been beyond measure indignant if he had thwarted their client in any one respect. In the height of his boisterous merriment, Mr Quilp, having on some pretence dismissed his attendant sprite for the moment, resumed his usual manner all at once, dismounted from his cask, and laid his hand upon the lawyer's sleeve.
'A word,' said the dwarf, 'before we go farther. Sally, harkee for a minute.' Miss Sally drew closer, as if accustomed to business conferences with their host which were the better for not having air. 'Business,' said the dwarf, glancing from brother to sister. 'Very private business. Lay your heads together when you're by yourselves.'
'Certainly, sir,' returned Brass, taking out his pocket-book and pencil. 'I'll take down the heads, if you please, sir. Remarkable documents,' added the lawyer, raising his eyes to the ceiling. 'Most remarkable documents. He states his point so clearly that it's a treat to have him. I don't know any Act of Parliament that's equal to him in clearness.' 'I shall deprive you of a treat,' said Quilp. 'Put up your book. We don't want any documents. So, there's a lad named Kit.' Miss Sally nodded, implying that she knew of him. 'Kit?' said Mr Sampson. 'Kit. Ha! I've heard the name before, but I don't exactly call to mind. I don't exactly.' 'You're as slow as a tortoise, and more thick-headed than a rhinoceros,' returned his obliging client, with an impatient gesture. 'He's extremely pleasant,' cried the obsequious Sampson. 'His acquaintance with natural history, too, is surprising. Quite a buffoon, quite.' There is no doubt that Mr Brass intended some compliment or other, and it has been argued with a show of reason that he would have said buffon, but made use of a superfluous vowel. Be this as it may, Quilp gave him no time for correction, as he performed that office himself by more than tapping him on the head with the handle of his umbrella. 'Don't let's have any wrangling,' said Miss Sally, staying his hand. 'I've showed you that I know him, and that's enough.'
'She's always foremost,' said the dwarf, patting her on the back, and looking contemptuously at Sampson. 'I don't like Kit, Sally.'
'Nor I,' rejoined Miss Brass. 'Nor I,' said Sampson.
'Why, that's right,' cried Quilp. 'Half our work is done already. This Kit is one of your honest people, one of your fair characters, a prowling, prying hound, a hypocrite, a double-faced, white-livered, sneaking spy, a crouching cur to those that feed and coax him, and a barking, yelping dog to all besides.'
'Fearfully eloquent!' cried Brass with a sneeze. 'Quite appalling!' 'Come to the point,' said Miss Sally, 'and don't talk so much.'
'Right again!'
exclaimed Quilp, with another contemptuous look at Sampson.
'Always foremost. I say, Sally, he is a yelping, insolent dog to all besides, and most of all to me. In short, I owe him a grudge.'
'That's enough, sir,' said Sampson.
'No, it's not enough, sir,' sneered Quilp. 'Will you hear me out? Besides that I owe him a grudge on that account, he thwarts me at this minute, and stands between me and an end which might otherwise prove a golden one to us all. Apart from that, I repeat that he crosses my humour, and I hate him. Now, you know the lad, and can guess the rest. Devise your means of putting him out of my way, and execute them. Shall it be done?'
'It shall, sir,' said Sampson.
'Then give me your hand,' retorted Quilp. 'Sally, girl, yours. I rely as much, or more, on you than him. Tom Scott comes back, lantern pipes, more grog, and a jolly night of it.'
No other word was spoken, no other look exchanged, which had the slightest reference to this, the real occasion of their meeting. The trio were well accustomed to act together, and were linked to each other by ties of mutual interest and advantage, and nothing more was needed. Resuming his boisterous manner with the same ease with which he had thrown it off, Quilp was in an instant the same uproarious, reckless little savage he had been a few seconds before. It was 10 o'clock at night before the amiable Sally supported her beloved and loving brother from the wilderness, by which time he needed the utmost support her tender frame could render, his walk being from some unknown reason anything but steady, and his legs constantly doubling up in unexpected places. Overpowered, notwithstanding his late prolonged slumbers, by the fatigues of the last few days, the dwarf lost no time in creeping to his dainty house, and was soon dreaming in his hammock. Leaving him to visions in which perhaps the quiet figures we quitted in the old church porch were not without their share, be it our task to rejoin them as they sat and watched. End of chapter 51. Chapter 52 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 52. After a long time, the schoolmaster appeared at the wicket gate of the churchyard, and hurried towards them, tingling in his hand as he came along a bundle of rusty keys. He was quite breathless with pleasure and haste when he reached the porch,
and at first could only point towards the old building which the child had been contemplating so earnestly.
'You see those two old houses?' he said at last.
'Yes, surely,' replied Nell. 'I've been looking at them nearly all the time you've been away.'
'And you would have looked at them more curiously yet if you could have guessed what I have to tell you,' said her friend. 'One of those houses is mine.'
Without saying any more, or giving the child time to reply, the schoolmaster took her hand, and, his honest face quite radiant with exultation, led her to the place of which he spoke. They stopped before its low arched door. After trying several of the keys in vain, the schoolmaster found one to fit the huge lock, which turned back, creaking, and admitted them into the house. The room into which they entered was a vaulted chamber, once nobly ornamented by cunning architects, and still retaining, in its beautiful groined roof and rich stone tracery, choice remnants of its ancient splendour. Foliage carved in the stone, and emulating the mastery of nature's hand, yet remained to tell how many times the leaves outside had come and gone, while it lived on unchanged. The broken figures supporting the burden of the chimney-piece, though mutilated, were still distinguishable for what they had been, far different from the dust without, and showed sadly by the empty hearth like creatures who had outlived their kind, and mourned their own too slow decay. In some old time, for even change was old in that old place, a wooden partition had been constructed in one part of the chamber to form a sleeping closet, into which the light was admitted at the same period by a rude window, or rather niche, cut in the solid wall. This screen, together with two seats in the broad chimney, had at some forgotten date been part of the church or convent, for the oak, hastily appropriated to its present purpose, had been little altered from its former shape, and presented to the eye a pile of fragments of rich carving from old monkish stalls. An open door leading to a small room or cell, dim with the light that came through leaves of ivy, completed the interior of this portion of the ruin. It was not quite destitute of furniture. A few strange chairs, whose arms and legs looked as though they had dwindled away with age, a table, the very spectre of its race, a great old chest that had once held records in the church, with other quaintly fashioned domestic necessaries, and store of firewood for the winter, were scattered around, and gave evident tokens of its occupation as a dwelling-place at no very distant time. The child looked around her, with that solemn feeling with which we contemplate the work of ages that have become but drops of water in the great ocean of eternity. The old man had followed them, but they were all three hushed for a space, and drew their breath softly, as if they feared to break the silence, even by so slight a sound.
'It is a very beautiful place,' said the child in a low voice.
'I almost feared you thought otherwise,' returned the schoolmaster. 'You shivered when we first came in, as if you felt it cold or gloomy.'
'It was not that,' said Nell, glancing round with a slight shudder. 'Indeed, I cannot tell you what it was, but when I saw the outside from the church porch, the same feeling came over me. It is its being so old and grey, perhaps.'
'A peaceful place to live in, don't you think so?' said her friend.
'Oh, yes,'
rejoined the child, clasping her hands earnestly.
'A quiet, happy place. A place to live and learn to die in.'
She would have said more, but that the energy of her thoughts caused her voice to falter, and come in trembling whispers from her lips.
'A place to live, and learn to live, and gather health of mind and body in,' said the schoolmaster, 'for this old house is yours.'
'Ours!'
cried the child.
'Aye,' returned the schoolmaster gaily, 'for many a merry year to come, I hope. I shall be a close neighbour, only next door, but this house is yours.' Having now disburdened himself of his great surprise, the schoolmaster sat down, and drawing Nell to his side, told her how he had learnt that ancient tenement had been occupied for a very long time by an old person, nearly 100 years of age, who kept the keys of the church opened it and closed it for the services, and showed it to strangers. How she had died not many weeks ago, and nobody had yet been found to fill the office. How, learning all this in an interview with the sexton, who was confined to his bed by rheumatism, he had been bold to make mention of his fellow traveller, which had been so favourably received by that high authority that he had taken courage, acting on his advice, to propound the matter to the clergyman. In a word, the result of his exertions was, that Nell and her grandfather were to be carried before the last named gentleman next day, and his approval of their conduct and appearance reserved as a matter of form, that they were already appointed to the vacant post. There's a small allowance of money,' said the schoolmaster. 'It is not much, but still enough to live upon in this retired spot. By clubbing our funds together, we shall do bravely, no fear of that.'
'Heaven bless and prosper you!'
sobbed the child. 'Amen, my dear,' returned her friend cheerfully. 'And all of us, as it will, and has, in leading us through sorrow and trouble to this tranquil life. But we must look at my house now. Come.' They repaired to the other tenement, tried the rusty keys as before, at length found the right one, and opened the worm-eaten door. It led into a chamber, vaulted and old, like that from which they had come, but not so spacious, and having only one other little room attached. It was not difficult to divine that the other house was of right the schoolmaster's, and that he had chosen for himself the least commodious in his care and regard for them. Like the adjoining habitation, it held such old articles of furniture as were absolutely necessary, and had its stack of firewood. To make these dwellings as habitable and full of comfort as they could, was now their pleasant care. In a short time, each had its cheerful fire glowing and crackling on the hearth, and reddening the pale old wall with a hale and healthy blush. Nell, busily plying her needle, repaired the tattered window hangings, drew together the rents that time had worn in the threadbare scraps of carpet, and made them whole and decent. The schoolmaster swept and smoothed the ground before the door, trimmed the long grass, trained the ivy and creeping plants which hung their drooping heads in melancholy neglect, and gave to the outer walls a cheery air of home. The old man, sometimes by his side and sometimes with the child, lent his aid to both, went here and there on little patient services, and was happy. Neighbours, too, as they came from work, proffered their help, or sent their children with such small presents or loans as the strangers needed most. It was a busy day, and night came on and found them wondering that there was yet so much to do, and that it should be dark so soon. They took their supper together in the house which may be henceforth called the child's, and, when they had finished their meal, drew round the fire, and almost in whispers, their hearts were too quiet and glad for loud expression, discussed their future plans. Before they separated, the schoolmaster read some prayers aloud, and then, full of gratitude and happiness, they parted for the night. At that silent hour when her grandfather was sleeping peacefully in his bed, and every sound was hushed, the child lingered before the dying embers, and thought of her past fortunes as if they had been a dream, and she only now awoke. The glare of the sinking flame, reflected in the oaken panels whose carved tops were dimly seen in the dusky roof, the aged walls where strange shadows came and went with every flickering of the fire, the solemn presence within of that decay which falls on senseless things the most enduring in their nature, and without and round about on every side, of death, filled her with deep and thoughtful feelings, but with none of terror or alarm. A change had been gradually stealing over her in the time of her loneliness and sorrow. With failing strength and heightening resolution, there had sprung up a purified and altered mind. There had grown in her bosom blessed thoughts and hopes, which are the portion of few, but the weak and drooping. There were none to see the frail, perishable figure, as it glided from the fire, and leaned pensively at the open casement; none but the stars, to look into the upturned face, and read its history. The old church bell rang out the hour with a mournful sound, as if it had grown sad from so much communing with the dead and unheeded warning to the living.
The fallen leaves rustled, the grass stirred upon the graves, all else was still and sleeping. Some of those dreamless sleepers lay close within the shadow of the church, touching the wall as if they clung to it for comfort and protection. Others had chosen to lie beneath the changing shade of trees, others by the path, that footsteps might come near them, others among the graves of little children. Some had desired to rest beneath the very ground they had trodden in their daily walks, some where the setting sun might shine upon their beds, some where its light would fall upon them when it rose. Perhaps not one of the imprisoned souls had been able quite to separate itself in living thought from its old companion. If any had, it had still felt for it a love like that which captives have been known to bear towards the cell in which they have been long confined, and even at parting hung upon its narrow bounds affectionately. It was long before the child closed the window and approached her bed. Again something of the same sensation as before, an involuntary chill, a momentary feeling akin to fear, but vanishing directly and leaving no alarm behind. Again, too, dreams of the little scholar, of their roof opening, and a column of bright faces rising far away into the sky, as she had seen in some old scriptural picture once, and looking down on her, asleep. It was a sweet and happy dream. The quiet spot outside seemed to remain the same, saving that there was music in the air and a sound of angels' wings. After a time the sisters came there, hand in hand, and stood among the graves, and then the dream grew dim and faded. With the brightness and joy of morning came the renewal of yesterday's labours, the revival of its pleasant thoughts, the restoration of its energies, cheerfulness, and hope. They worked gaily in ordering and arranging their houses until noon, and then went to visit the clergyman. He was a simple-hearted old gentleman of a shrinking, subdued spirit, accustomed to retirement, and very little acquainted with the world, which he had left many years before to come and settle in that place. His wife had died in the house in which he still lived, and he had long since lost sight of any earthly cares or hopes beyond it. He received them very kindly, and at once showed an interest in Nell, asking her name and age, her birthplace, the circumstances which had led her there, and so forth. The schoolmaster had already told her story. They had no other friends or home to leave, he said, and had come to share his fortunes. He loved the child as though she were his own. 'Well, well,' said the clergyman, 'let it be as you desire. She is very young.' 'Old in adversity and trial, sir,' replied the schoolmaster. 'God help her. Let her rest and forget them,' said the old gentleman. 'But an old church is a dull and gloomy place for one so young as you, my child.'
'Oh no, sir,' returned Nell. 'I have no such thoughts indeed.'
'I would rather see her dancing on the green at nights,' said the old gentleman, laying his hand upon her head, and smiling sadly, 'than have her sitting in the shadow of our mouldering arches. You must look to this, and see that her heart does not grow heavy among these solemn ruins. Your request is granted, friend.' After more kind words, they withdrew, and repaired to the child's house, where they were yet in conversation on their happy fortune, when another friend appeared. This was a little old gentleman who lived in the parsonage house, and had resided there, so they learnt soon afterwards, ever since the death of the clergyman's wife, which had happened 15 years before. He had been his college friend, and always his close companion. In the first shock of his grief he had come to console and comfort him, and from that time they had never parted company. The little old gentleman was the active spirit of the place, the adjuster of all differences, the promoter of all merrymakings, the dispenser of his friend's bounty, and of no small charity of his own besides, the universal mediator, comforter, and friend. None of the simple villagers had cared to ask his name, or, when they knew it, to store it in their memory. Perhaps from some vague rumour of his college honours which had been whispered abroad on his first arrival, perhaps because he was an unmarried, unencumbered gentleman, he had been called the Bachelor. The name pleased him, or suited him as well as any other,
and the bachelor he had ever since remained. And the bachelor it was, it may be added, who with his own hands had laid in the stock of fuel which the wanderers had found in their new habitation. The bachelor then, to call him by his usual appellation, lifted the latch, showed his little round mild face for a moment at the door, and stepped into the room like one who was no stranger to it. 'You are Mr Martin, the new schoolmaster?' he said, greeting Nell's kind friend. 'I am, sir.' 'You come well recommended, and I am glad to see you. I should have been in the way yesterday, expecting you, but I rode across the country to carry a message from a sick mother to her daughter in service some miles off, and have but just now returned. This is our young church-keeper. You are not the less welcome, friend, for her sake, or for this old man's, nor the worse teacher for having learnt humanity.' 'She has been ill, sir, very lately,' said the schoolmaster, in answer to the look with which their visitor regarded Nell when he had kissed her cheek. 'Yes, yes, I know she has,' he rejoined. 'There have been suffering and heartache here.' 'Indeed there have, sir.' The little old gentleman glanced at the grandfather, and back again at the child, whose hand he took tenderly in his, and held. 'You will be happier here,' he said. 'We will try, at least, to make you so. You have made great improvements here already. Are they the work of your hands?'
'Yes, sir.'
'We may make some others. Not better in themselves, but with better means, perhaps,' said the bachelor. 'Let us see now. Let us see.' Nell accompanied him into the other little rooms, and over both the houses, in which he found various small comforts wanting, which he engaged to supply from a certain collection of odds and ends he had at home, and which must have been a very miscellaneous and extensive one, as it comprehended the most opposite articles imaginable. They all came, however, and came without loss of time, for the little old gentleman, disappearing for some 5 or 10 minutes, presently returned laden with old shelves, rugs, blankets, and other household gear, and followed by a boy bearing a similar load. These being cast on the floor in a promiscuous heap, yielded a quantity of occupation in arranging, erecting, and putting away, the superintendence of which task evidently afforded the old gentleman extreme delight, and engaged him for some time with great briskness and activity. When nothing more was left to be done, he charged the boy to run off and bring his schoolmates to be marshalled before their new master and solemnly reviewed. 'As good a set of fellows, Martin, as you'd wish to see,' he said, turning to the schoolmaster when the boy was gone. 'But I don't let 'em know I think so. That wouldn't do at all.' The messenger soon returned at the head of a long row of urchins, great and small, who, being confronted by the bachelor at the house door, fell into various convulsions of politeness, clutching their hats and caps, squeezing them into the smallest possible dimensions, and making all manner of bows and scrapes, which the little old gentleman contemplated with excessive satisfaction, and expressed his approval of by a great many nods and smiles. Indeed, his approbation of the boys was by no means so scrupulously disguised as he had led the schoolmaster to suppose, inasmuch as it broke out in sundry loud whispers and confidential remarks, which were perfectly audible to them every one. 'This first boy, schoolmaster,' said the bachelor, 'is John Owen, a lad of good parts, sir, and frank, honest temper, but too thoughtless, too playful, too light-headed by far. That boy, my good sir, would break his neck with pleasure, and deprive his parents of their chief comfort. And between ourselves, when you come to see him at hare and hounds, taking the fence and ditch by the finger post, and sliding down the face of the little quarry, you'll never forget it. It's beautiful.' John Owen having been thus rebuked, and being in perfect possession of the speech aside, the bachelor singled out another boy. 'Now look at that lad, sir,' said the bachelor. 'You see that fellow? Richard Evans his name is, sir. An amazing boy to learn, blessed with a good memory,
and a ready understanding, and moreover with a good voice and ear for psalm singing, in which he is the best among us. Yet, sir, that boy will come to a bad end. He'll never die in his bed. He's always falling asleep in sermon time, and to tell you the truth, Mr Martin, I always did the same at his age, and feel quite certain that it was natural to my constitution, and I couldn't help it.' This hopeful pupil, edified by the above terrible reproval, the bachelor turned to another. 'But if we talk of examples to be shunned,' said he, 'if we come to boys that should be a warning and a beacon to all their fellows, here's the one, and I hope you won't spare him. This is the lad, sir. This one with the blue eyes and light hair. This is a swimmer, sir. This fellow, a diver. Lord save us! This is a boy, sir, who had a fancy for plunging into 18 feet of water with his clothes on, and bringing up a blind man's dog, who was being drowned by the weight of his chain and collar, while his master stood wringing his hands upon the bank, bewailing the loss of his guide and friend. I sent the boy 2 guineas anonymously, sir,' added the bachelor in his peculiar whisper, 'directly I heard of it, but never mention it on any account, for he hasn't the least idea that it came from me.' Having disposed of this culprit, the bachelor turned to another, and from him to another, and so on through the whole array, laying for their wholesome restriction within due bounds the same cutting emphasis on such of their propensities as were dearest to his heart and were unquestionably referable to his own precept and example. Thoroughly persuaded in the end that he had made them miserable by his severity, he dismissed them with a small present and an admonition to walk quietly home, without any leapings, scufflings, or turnings out of the way, which injunction he informed the schoolmaster in the same audible confidence he did not think he could have obeyed when he was a boy, had his life depended on it. Hailing these little tokens of the bachelor's disposition as so many assurances of his own welcome course from that time, the schoolmaster parted from him with a light heart and joyous spirits, and deemed himself one of the happiest men on earth. The windows of the 2 old houses were ruddy again that night, with the reflection of the cheerful fires that burnt within, and the bachelor and his friend, pausing to look upon them as they returned from their evening walk, spoke softly together of the beautiful child, and looked round upon the churchyard with a sigh. End of chapter 52. Chapter 53 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 53. Nell was stirring early in the morning, and having discharged her household tasks and put everything in order for the good schoolmaster, though sorely against his will, for he would have spared her the pains, took down from its nail by the fireside a little bundle of keys with which the bachelor had formally invested her on the previous day, and went out alone to visit the old church. The sky was serene and bright, the air clear, perfumed with the fresh scent of newly fallen leaves, and grateful to every sense. The neighbouring stream sparkled and rolled onward with a tuneful sound. The dew glistened on the green mounds, like tears shed by good spirits over the dead. Some young children sported among the tombs, and hid from each other with laughing faces. They had an infant with them, and had laid it down asleep upon a child's grave in a little bed of leaves. It was a new grave, the resting place, perhaps, of some little creature, who, meek and patient in its illness, had often sat and watched them, and now seemed, to their minds, scarcely changed. She drew near and asked one of them whose grave it was. The child answered that that was not its name. It was a garden. His brother's. It was greener, he said, than all the other gardens, and the birds loved it better because he had been used to feed them. When he had done speaking, he looked at her with a smile, and kneeling down and nestling for a moment with his cheek against the turf, bounded merrily away. She passed the church, gazing upward at its old tower,
went through the wicket gate, and so into the village. The old sexton, leaning on a crutch, was taking the air at his cottage door, and gave her good morrow.
'You are better,'
said the child, stopping to speak with him.
'Ay, surely,' returned the old man. 'I'm thankful to say, much better.'
'You will be quite well soon.'
'With Heaven's leave and a little patience. But come in, come in.'
The old man limped on before, and warning her of the downward step, which he achieved himself with no small difficulty, led the way into his little cottage.
'It is but one room, you see. There is another up above, but the stair's got harder to climb o' late years, and I never use it. I'm thinking of taking to it again next summer, though.'
The child wondered how a grey-headed man like him, one of his trade too, could talk of time so easily. He saw her eyes wandering to the tools that hung upon the wall, and smiled.
'I warrant now,' he said, 'that you think all those are used in making graves.'
'Indeed, I wondered that you wanted so many.'
'And well you might. I am a gardener. I dig the ground, and plant things that are to live and grow. My works don't all moulder away and rot in the earth. You see that spade in the centre?'
'The very old one, so notched and worn? Yes.'
'That's the sexton's spade, and it's a well-used one, as you see. We're healthy people here, but it has done a power of work. If it could speak now, that spade, it would tell you of many an unexpected job that it and I have done together. But I forget 'em, for my memory's a poor one. That's nothing new,' he added hastily. 'It always was.'
'There are flowers and shrubs to speak to your other work,' said the child.
'Oh yes, and tall trees. But they are not so separate from the sexton's labours as you think.'
'No?'
'Not in my mind and recollection, such as it is,' said the old man. 'Indeed, they often help it. For say that I planted such a tree for such a man. There it stands to remind me that he died. When I look at its broad shadow, and remember what it was in his time, it helps me to the age of my other work, and I can tell you pretty nearly when I made his grave.'
'But it may remind you of one who is still alive,' said the child.
'Of 20 that are dead, in connection with that one who lives, then,' rejoined the old man. 'Wife, husband, parents, brothers, sisters, children, friends, a score at least. So it happens that the sexton's spade gets worn and battered. I shall need a new one next summer.'
The child looked quickly towards him, thinking that he jested with his age and infirmity. But the unconscious sexton was quite in earnest. 'Ah!' he said after a brief silence.
'People never learn. They never learn. It's only we who turn up the ground where nothing grows and everything decays, who think of such things as these, who think of them properly, I mean. You have been into the church?'
'I am going there now,'
the child replied.
'There's an old well there,' said the sexton, 'right underneath the belfry. A deep, dark, echoing well. 40 year ago, you had only to let down the bucket till the first knot in the rope was free of the windlass, and you heard it splashing in the cold dull water. By little and little the water fell away, so that in 10 year after that a second knot was made, and you must unwind so much rope, or the bucket swung tight and empty at the end. In 10 years' time the water fell again, and a third knot was made.
In 10 years more, the well dried up. And now, if you lower the bucket till your arms are tired, and let out nearly all the cord, you'll hear it, of a sudden, clanking and rattling on the ground below, with a sound of being so deep and so far down that your heart leaps into your mouth, and you start away as if you were falling in.
'A dreadful place to come on in the dark!'
exclaimed the child, who had followed the old man's looks and words until she seemed to stand upon its brink.
'What is it but a grave?' said the sexton. 'What else? And which of our old folks, knowing all this, thought, as the spring subsided, of their own failing strength and lesson in life? Not one.'
'Are you very old yourself?'
asked the child involuntarily.
'I shall be 79 next summer.'
'You still work when you are well?'
'Work? To be sure. You shall see my gardens hereabout. Look at the window there. I made and have kept that plot of ground entirely with my own hands. By this time next year I shall hardly see the sky, the boughs will have grown so thick. I have my winter work at night besides.'
He opened, as he spoke, a cupboard close to where he sat, and produced some miniature boxes, carved in a homely manner and made of old wood.
'Some gentlefolks who are fond of ancient days and what belongs to them,' he said, 'like to buy these keepsakes from our church and ruins. Sometimes I make them of scraps of oak that turn up here and there, sometimes of bits of coffins which the vaults have long preserved. See here, this is a little chest of the last kind, clasped at the edges with fragments of brass plates that had writing on 'em once, though it would be hard to read it now. I haven't many by me at this time of year, but these shelves will be full next summer.'
The child admired and praised his work, and shortly afterwards departed, thinking as she went how strange it was that this old man, drawing from his pursuits and everything around him one stern moral, never contemplated its application to himself, and while he dwelt upon the uncertainty of human life, seemed both in word and deed to deem himself immortal. But her musings did not stop here, for she was wise enough to think that by a good and merciful adjustment this must be human nature, and that the old sexton, with his plans for next summer, was but a type of all mankind. Full of these meditations, she reached the church. It was easy to find the key belonging to the outer door, for each was labelled on a scrap of yellow parchment. Its very turning in the lock awoke a hollow sound, and when she entered with a faltering step, the echoes that it raised in closing made her start. If the peace of the simple village had moved the child more strongly, because of the dark and troubled ways that lay beyond, and through which she had journeyed with such failing feet, what was the deep impression of finding herself alone in that solemn building, where the very light coming through sunken windows seemed old and grey, and the air, redolent of earth and mould, seemed laden with decay, purified by time of all its grosser particles, and sighing through arch and aisle and clustered pillars like the breath of ages gone. Here was the broken pavement, worn so long ago by pious feet, that time, stealing on the pilgrims' steps, had trodden out their track and left but crumbling stones. Here were the rotten beam, the sinking arch, the sapped and mouldering wall, the lowly trench of earth, the stately tomb on which no epitaph remained, all, marble, stone, iron, wood, and dust, one common monument of ruin. The best work and the worst, the plainest and the richest, the stateliest and the least imposing, both of heaven's work and man's, all found one common level here, and told one common tale. Some part of the edifice had been a baronial chapel, and here were effigies of warriors stretched upon their beds of stone with folded hands, cross-legged. Those who had fought in the holy wars, girded with their swords and cased in armour as they had lived. Some of these knights had their own weapons, helmets, coats of mail, hanging upon the walls hard by, and dangling from rusty hooks. Broken and dilapidated as they were, they yet retained their ancient form, and something of their ancient aspect. Thus violent deeds live after men upon the earth, and traces of war and bloodshed will survive in mournful shapes, long after those who worked the desolation are but atoms of earth themselves. The child sat down in this old silent place among the stark figures on the tombs. They made it more quiet there than elsewhere to her fancy, and gazing round with a feeling of awe tempered with a calm delight, felt that now she was happy and at rest. She took a Bible from the shelf and read, then laying it down, thought of the summer days and the bright springtime that would come, of the rays of sun that would fall in a slant upon the sleeping forms, of the leaves that would flutter at the window and play in glistening shadows on the pavement, of the songs of birds and growth of buds and blossoms out of doors, of the sweet air that would steal in and gently wave the tattered banners overhead. What if the spot awakened thoughts of death? Die who would, it would still remain the same. These sights and sounds would still go on as happily as ever. It would be no pain to sleep amidst them. She left the chapel, very slowly and often turning back to gaze again, and coming to a low door which plainly led into the tower, opened it and climbed the winding stair in darkness, save where she looked down through narrow loopholes on the place she had left, or caught a glimmering vision of the dusty bells. At length she gained the end of the ascent, and stood upon the turret's top. Oh, the glory of the sudden burst of light! The freshness of the fields and woods stretching away on every side, and meeting the bright blue sky, the cattle grazing in the pasturage, the smoke that, coming from among the trees, seemed to rise upward from the green earth, the children yet at their gambols down below, all, everything, so beautiful and happy. It was like passing from death to life. It was drawing nearer heaven. The children were gone when she emerged into the porch and locked the door. As she passed the schoolhouse, she could hear the busy hum of voices. Her friend had begun his labours only on that day. The noise grew louder, and looking back, she saw the boys come trooping out and disperse themselves with merry shouts and play.
It's a good thing, thought the child. I am very glad they passed the church.
And then she stopped, to fancy how the noise would sound inside, and how gently it would seem to die away upon the ear. Again that day, yes, twice again, she stole back to the old chapel, and in her former seat read from the same book, or indulged the same quiet train of thought. Even when it had grown dusk, and the shadows of coming night made it more solemn still, the child remained, like one rooted to the spot, and had no fear or thought of stirring. They found her there at last, and took her home. She looked pale, but very happy, until they separated for the night, and then, as the poor schoolmaster stooped down to kiss her cheek, he thought he felt a tear upon his face. End of chapter 53. Chapter 54 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 54. The bachelor, among his various occupations, found in the old church a constant source of interest and amusement. Taking that pride in it which men conceive for the wonders of their own little world, he had made its history his study, and many a summer day within its walls, and many a winter's night beside the parsonage fire, had found the bachelor still poring over and adding to his goodly store of tale and legend. As he was not one of those rough spirits who would strip fair truth of every little shadowy vestment in which time and teeming fancies love to array her, and some of which become her pleasantly enough, serving, like the waters of her well, to add new graces to the charms they half conceal and half suggest, and to awaken interest and pursuit rather than languor and indifference. As, unlike this stern and obdurate class, he loved to see the goddess crowned with those garlands of wild flowers which tradition wreaths for her gentle wearing, and which are often freshest in their homeliest shapes. He trod with a light step and bore with a light hand upon the dust of centuries, unwilling to demolish any of the airy shrines that had been raised above it, if any good feeling or affection of the human heart were hiding thereabouts. Thus, in the case of an ancient coffin of rough stone, supposed for many generations to contain the bones of a certain baron, who, after ravaging, with cut and thrust and plunder, in foreign lands, came back with a penitent and sorrowing heart to die at home, but which had been lately shown by learned antiquaries to be no such thing, as the baron in question, so they contended, had died hard in battle, gnashing his teeth and cursing with his latest breath. The bachelor stoutly maintained that the old tale was the true one, that the baron, repenting him of the evil, had done great charities and meekly given up the ghost, and that if ever baron went to heaven, that baron was then at peace. In like manner, when the aforesaid antiquaries did argue and contend that a certain secret vault was not the tomb of a grey-haired lady who had been hanged and drawn and quartered by glorious Queen Bess for succouring a wretched priest who fainted of thirst and hunger at her door, the bachelor did solemnly maintain, against all comers, that the church was hallowed by the said poor lady's ashes, that her remains had been collected in the night from 4 of the city's gates, and thither in secret brought and there deposited. And the bachelor did further, being highly excited at such times, deny the glory of Queen Bess, and assert the immeasurably greater glory of the meanest woman in her realm who had a merciful and tender heart. As to the assertion that the flat stone near the door was not the grave of the miser who had disowned his only child and left a sum of money to the church to buy a peal of bells, the bachelor did readily admit the same, and that the place had given birth to no such man. In a word, he would have had every stone and plate of brass the monument only of deeds whose memory should survive. All others he was willing to forget. They might be buried in consecrated ground, but he would have had them buried deep, and never brought to light again. It was from the lips of such a tutor that the child learnt her easy task. Already impressed beyond all telling by the silent building and the peaceful beauty of the spot in which it stood, majestic age surrounded by perpetual youth, it seemed to her, when she heard these things sacred to all goodness and virtue. It was another world, where sin and sorrow never came, a tranquil place of rest, where nothing evil entered. When the bachelor had given her in connection with almost every tomb and flat gravestone some history of its own, he took her down into the old crypt, now a mere dull vault, and showed her how it had been lighted up in the time of the monks, and how, amid lamps depending from the roof, and swinging censers exhaling scented odours, and habits glittering with gold and silver, and pictures and precious stuffs, and jewels all flashing and glistening through the low arches, the chaunt of aged voices had been many a time heard there, at midnight, in old days, while hooded figures knelt and prayed around, and told their rosaries of beads. Thence he took her above ground again, and showed her, high up in the old walls, small galleries where the nuns had been wont to glide along, dimly seen in their dark dresses so far off, or to pause, like gloomy shadows, listening to the prayers. He showed her, too, how the warriors, whose figures rested on the tombs, had worn those rotting scraps of armour up above. How this had been a helmet, and that a shield, and that a gauntlet, and how they had wielded the great two-handed swords, and beaten men down with yonder iron mace. All that he told the child, she treasured in her mind, and sometimes when she awoke at night from dreams of those old times, and rising from her bed looked out at the dark church, she almost hoped to see the windows lighted up, and hear the organs swell and sound of voices on the rushing wind. The old sexton soon got better, and was about again. From him the child learnt many other things, though of a different kind. He was not able to work, but one day there was a grave to be made, and he came to overlook the man who dug it. He was in a talkative mood, and the child, at first standing by his side, and afterwards sitting on the grass at his feet, with her thoughtful face raised towards his, began to converse with him. Now, the man who did the sexton's duty was a little older than he, though much more active, but he was deaf, and when the sexton, who peradventure, on a pinch, might have walked a mile with great difficulty in half a dozen hours, exchanged a remark with him about his work, the child could not help noticing that he did so with an impatient kind of pity for his infirmity, as if he were himself the strongest and heartiest man alive.
'I am sorry to see there is this to do,' said the child when she approached. 'I heard of no one having died.'
'She lived in another hamlet, my dear,' returned the sexton, 3 mile away.'
'Was she young?'
'Yes,' said the sexton. 'Not more than 64, I think. David, was she more than 64? David, who was digging hard, heard nothing of the question. The sexton, as he could not reach to touch him with his crutch, and was too infirm to rise without assistance, called his attention by throwing a little mould upon his red nightcap. 'What's the matter now?' said David, looking up. 'How old was Becky Morgan?' asked the sexton. 'Becky Morgan?' repeated David. 'Yes,' replied the sexton, adding in a half compassionate, half irritable tone, which the old man couldn't hear, 'You're getting very deaf, Davy, very deaf to be sure.' The old man stopped in his work, and cleansing his spade with a piece of slate he had by him for the purpose, and scraping off, in the process, the essence of heaven knows how many Becky Morgans, set himself to consider the subject. 'Let me think,' quoth he. 'I saw last night what they had put upon the coffin. Was it 79? No, no,' said the sexton. 'Ah, yes, it was though,' returned the old man with a sigh. 'For I remember thinking she was very near our age. Yes, it was 79. Are you sure you didn't mistake a figure, Davy?' asked the sexton, with signs of some emotion. 'What?' said the old man. 'Say that again.' 'He's very deaf. He is very deaf indeed,' cried the sexton petulantly. 'Are you sure you're right about the figures?' 'Oh, quite,' replied the old man. 'Why not?' 'He's exceedingly deaf,' muttered the sexton to himself. 'I think he's getting foolish.' The child rather wondered what had led him to this belief, as, to say the truth, the old man seemed quite as sharp as he, and was infinitely more robust. As the sexton said nothing more just then, however, she forgot it for the time, and spoke again. 'You were telling me,' she said, 'about your gardening. Do you ever plant things here?' 'In the churchyard?' returned the sexton. 'Not I.' 'I have seen some flowers and little shrubs about,' the child rejoined. 'There are some over there, you see. I thought they were of your rearing, though indeed they grow but poorly.' 'They grow as Heaven wills,' said the old man, 'and it kindly ordains that they shall never flourish here.' 'I do not understand you.' 'Why, this it is,' said the sexton. 'They mark the graves of those who had very tender, loving friends.' 'I was sure they did,' the child exclaimed. 'I am very glad to know they do.' 'Ay,' returned the old man. 'But stay. Look at them. See how they hang their heads, and droop and wither. Do you guess the reason?' 'No,' the child replied. 'Because the memory of those who lie below passes away so soon. At first they tend them morning, noon, and night. They soon begin to come less frequently.
from once a day to once a week, from once a week to once a month, then at long and uncertain intervals, then not at all. Such tokens seldom flourish long. I have known the briefest summer flowers outlive them.
'I grieve to hear it,' said the child.
'Ah! So say the gentlefolks who come down here to look about them,' returned the old man, shaking his head. 'But I say otherwise. It's a pretty custom you have in this part of the country, they say to me sometimes, to plant the graves. But it's melancholy to see these things all withering or dead. I crave their pardon, and tell them that, as I take it, 'tis a good sign for the happiness of the living. And so it is. It's nature.'
'Perhaps the mourners learn to look to the blue sky by day, and to the stars by night, and to think that the dead are there, and not in graves,' said the child in an earnest voice.
'Perhaps so,' replied the old man doubtfully. 'It may be.'
'Whether it be as I believe it is or no,' thought the child within herself, 'I'll make this place my garden. It will be no harm, at least, to work here day by day, and pleasant thoughts will come of it, I am sure.'
Her glowing cheek and moistened eye passed unnoticed by the sexton, who turned towards old David and called him by his name. It was plain that Becky Morgan's age still troubled him, though why, the child could scarcely understand. The second or third repetition of his name attracted the old man's attention. Pausing from his work, he leant on his spade and put his hand to his dull ear. 'Did you call?' he said. 'I have been thinking, Davy,' replied the sexton, 'that she,' he pointed to the grave, 'must have been a deal older than you or me.' '79,' answered the old man with a shake of the head. 'I tell you that I saw it.' 'Saw it?' replied the sexton. 'Aye, but Davy, women don't always tell the truth about their age.' 'That's true indeed,' said the other old man, with a sudden sparkle in his eye. 'She might have been older. I'm sure she must have been. I only think how old she looked. You and I seemed but boys to her.' 'She did look old,' rejoined David. 'You're right. She did look old.' 'Call to mind how old she looked for many a long, long year, and say if she could be but 79 at last, only our age,' said the sexton. 5 year older at the very least,' cried the other. 5, retorted the sexton. 10, good 89. I call to mind the time her daughter died. She was 89 if she was a day, and tries to pass upon us now for 10 years younger. Oh, human vanity!' The other old man was not behindhand with some moral reflections on this fruitful theme, and both adduced a mass of evidence, of such weight as to render it doubtful, not whether the deceased was of the age suggested, but whether she had not almost reached the patriarchal term of 100. When they had settled this question to their mutual satisfaction, the sexton, with his friend's assistance, rose to go. 'It's chilly sitting here, and I must be careful till the summer,' he said, as he prepared to limp away. 'What?' asked old David. 'He's very deaf, poor fellow,' cried the sexton. 'Good bye.' 'Ah!' said old David, looking after him. 'He's failing very fast. He ages every day.' And so they parted, each persuaded that the other had less life in him than himself, and both greatly consoled and comforted by the little fiction they had agreed upon respecting Becky Morgan, whose decease was no longer a precedent of uncomfortable application, and would be no business of theirs for 60 of years to come. The child remained, for some minutes, watching the deaf old man as he threw out the earth with his shovel,
and often stopping to cough and fetch his breath, still muttered to himself, with a kind of sober chuckle, that the sexton was wearing fast. At length she turned away, and walking thoughtfully through the churchyard, came unexpectedly upon the schoolmaster, who was sitting on a green grave in the sun, reading. 'Nell here,' he said cheerfully, as he closed his book. 'It does me good to see you in the air and light. I feared you were again in the church, where you so often are.'
'Feared?'
replied the child, sitting down beside him.
'Is it not a good place?'
'Yes, yes,' said the schoolmaster, 'but you must be gay sometimes. Nay, don't shake your head and smile so sadly.'
'Not sadly, if you knew my heart. Do not look at me as if you thought me sorrowful. There is not a happier creature on earth than I am now.'
Full of grateful tenderness, the child took his hand and folded it between her own.
'It's God's will,'
she said, when they had been silent for some time. 'What?'
'All this,' she rejoined. 'All this about us. But which of us is sad now? You see that I am smiling.'
'And so am I,' said the schoolmaster, 'smiling to think how often we shall laugh in this same place. Were you not talking yonder?'
'Yes,'
the child rejoined. 'Of something that has made you sorrowful?'
There was a long pause. 'What was it?' said the schoolmaster tenderly. 'Come, tell me what it was.'
'I rather grieve. I do rather grieve to think,'
said the child, bursting into tears,
'that those who die about us are so soon forgotten.'
'And do you think,' said the schoolmaster, marking the glance she had thrown around, 'that an unvisited grave, a withered tree, a faded flower or two, are tokens of forgetfulness or cold neglect? Do you think there are no deeds far away from here in which these dead may be best remembered? Nell, Nell, there may be people busy in the world at this instant, in whose good actions and good thoughts these very graves, neglected as they look to us, are the chief instruments.'
'Tell me no more,' said the child quickly. 'Tell me no more. I feel I know it. How could I be unmindful of it when I thought of you?'
'There is nothing,' cried her friend, 'no, nothing innocent or good that dies and is forgotten. Let us hold to that faith, or none. An infant, a prattling child, dying in its cradle, will live again in the better thoughts of those who loved it, and will play its part, through them, in the redeeming actions of the world, though its body be burnt to ashes, or drowned in the deepest sea. There is not an angel added to the host of heaven, but does its blessed work on earth in those that loved it here. Forgotten! Oh, if the good deeds of human creatures could be traced to their source, how beautiful would even death appear! For how much charity, mercy, and purified affection would be seen to have their growth in dusty graves!
'Yes,' said the child, 'it is the truth. I know it is. Who should feel its force so much as I, in whom your little scholar lives again? Dear, dear good friend, if you knew the comfort you have given me!'
The poor schoolmaster made her no answer, but bent over her in silence, for his heart was full. They were yet seated in the same place when the grandfather approached. Before they had spoken many words together, the church clock struck the hour of school, and their friend withdrew. 'A good man,' said the grandfather, looking after him. 'A kind man. Surely he will never harm us, Nell?
We are safe here at last, eh? We will never go away from here.' The child shook her head and smiled. 'She needs rest,' said the old man, patting her cheek. 'Too pale, too pale. She is not like what she was.'
'When?'
asked the child. 'Ah!' said the old man. 'To be sure. When? How many weeks ago? Could I count them on my fingers? Let them rest, though. They're better gone.'
'Much better, dear,' replied the child. 'We will forget them, or if we ever call them to mind, it shall be only as some uneasy dream that has passed away.'
'Hush!' said the old man, motioning hastily to her with his hand, and looking over his shoulder. 'No more talk of the dream and all the miseries it brought. There are no dreams here. 'Tis a quiet place, and they keep away. Let us never think about them, lest they should pursue us again. Sunken eyes and hollow cheeks, wet, cold, and famine, and horrors before them all that were even worse. We must forget such things if we would be tranquil here.'
'Thank Heaven,'
inwardly exclaimed the child,
'for this most happy change.'
'I will be patient,' said the old man, 'humble, very thankful, and obedient, if you will let me stay. But do not hide from me, do not steal away alone. Let me keep beside you. Indeed, I will be very true and faithful, Nell.'
'I steal away alone? Why, that,' replied the child, with assumed gaiety, 'would be a pleasant jest indeed. See here, dear grandfather, we'll make this place our garden. Why not? It is a very good one, and to-morrow we'll begin and work together, side by side.'
'It is a brave thought!' cried her grandfather. 'Mind, darling, we begin to-morrow.' Who so delighted as the old man, when they next day began their labour? Who so unconscious of all associations connected with the spot as he? They plucked the long grass and nettles from the tombs, thinned the poor shrubs and roots, made the turf smooth, and cleared it of the leaves and weeds. They were yet in the ardour of their work, when the child, raising her head from the ground over which she bent, observed that the bachelor was sitting on the stile close by, watching them in silence. 'A kind office,' said the little gentleman, nodding to Nell, as she curtsied to him. 'Have you done all that this morning?'
'It is very little, sir,' returned the child, with downcast eyes, 'to what we mean to do.'
'Good work, good work,' said the bachelor. 'But do you only labour at the graves of children and young people?'
'We shall come to the others in good time, sir,' replied Nell, turning her head aside, and speaking softly. It was a slight incident, and might have been design or accident, or the child's unconscious sympathy with youth, but it seemed to strike upon her grandfather, though he had not noticed it before. He looked in a hurried manner at the graves, then anxiously at the child, then pressed her to his side, and bade her stop to rest. Something he had long forgotten appeared to struggle faintly in his mind. It did not pass away, as weightier things had done, but came uppermost again, and yet again, and many times that day, and often afterwards. Once, while they were yet at work, the child, seeing that he often turned and looked uneasily at her, as though he were trying to resolve some painful doubts or collect some scattered thoughts, urged him to tell the reason. But he said it was nothing, nothing, and, laying her head upon his arm, patted her fair cheek with his hand, and muttered that she grew stronger every day, and would be a woman soon. End of chapter 54.
Chapter 55 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 55. From that time there sprang up in the old man's mind a solicitude about the child which never slept or left him. There are chords in the human heart, strange, varying strings, which are only struck by accident, which will remain mute and senseless to appeals the most passionate and earnest, and respond at last to the slightest casual touch. In the most insensible or childish minds, there is some train of reflection which art can seldom lead, or skill assist, but which will reveal itself, as great truths have done, by chance, and when the discoverer has the plainest end in view. From that time the old man never for a moment forgot the weakness and devotion of the child. From the time of that slight incident, he who had seen her toiling by his side through so much difficulty and suffering, and had scarcely thought of her otherwise than as the partner of miseries which he felt severely in his own person, and deplored for his own sake at least as much as hers, awoke to a sense of what he owed her, and what those miseries had made her. Never, no, never once, in one unguarded moment from that time to the end, did any care for himself, any thought of his own comfort, any selfish consideration or regard, distract his thoughts from the gentle object of his love. He would follow her up and down, waiting till she should tire, and lean upon his arm. He would sit opposite to her in the chimney-corner, content to watch and look until she raised her head and smiled upon him as of old. He would discharge by stealth those household duties which tasked her powers too heavily. He would rise, in the cold dark nights, to listen to her breathing in her sleep, and sometimes crouch for hours by her bedside, only to touch her hand. He who knows all can only know what hopes and fears and thoughts of deep affection were in that one disordered brain, and what a change had fallen on the poor old man. Sometimes weeks had crept on, then the child, exhausted, though with little fatigue, would pass whole evenings on a couch beside the fire. At such times the schoolmaster would bring in books, and read to her aloud, and seldom an evening passed but the bachelor came in and took his turn of reading. The old man sat and listened, with little understanding for the words, but with his eyes fixed upon the child, and if she smiled or brightened with the story, he would say it was a good one, and conceive a fondness for the very book. When in their evening talk the bachelor told some tale that pleased her, as his tales were sure to do, the old man would painfully try to store it in his mind. Nay, when the bachelor left them, he would sometimes slip out after him, and humbly beg that he would tell him such a part again, that he might learn to win a smile from Nell. But these were rare occasions, happily, for the child yearned to be out of doors and walking in her solemn garden. Parties, too, would come to see the church, and those who came, speaking to others of the child, sent more, so even at that season of the year they had visitors almost daily. The old man would follow them at a little distance through the building, listening to the voice he loved so well, and when the strangers left and parted from Nell, he would mingle with them to catch up fragments of their conversation, or he would stand for the same purpose, with his grey head uncovered, at the gate as they passed through. They always praised the child, her sense and beauty, and he was proud to hear them. But what was that, so often added, which wrung his heart and made him sob and weep alone in some dull corner? Alas, even careless strangers, they who had no feeling for her but the interest of the moment, they who would go away and forget next week that such a being lived, even they saw it, even they pitied her, even they bade him good day compassionately, and whispered as they passed. The people of the village, too, of whom there was not one but grew to have a fondness for poor Nell, even among them there was the same feeling, a tenderness towards her, a compassionate regard for her, increasing every day. The very schoolboys, light-hearted and thoughtless as they were, even they cared for her. The roughest among them was sorry if he missed her in the usual place upon his way to school, and would turn out of the path to ask for her at the latticed window. If she were sitting in the church, they perhaps might peep in softly at the open door, but they never spoke to her, unless she rose and went to speak to them. Some feeling was abroad which raised the child above them all. So when Sunday came, they were all poor country people in the church, for the castle in which the old family had lived was an empty ruin, and there were none but humble folks for 7 miles around. There, as elsewhere, they had an interest in Nell. They would gather round her in the porch, before and after service. Young children would cluster at her skirts, and aged men and women forsake their gossips to give her kindly greeting. None of them, young or old, thought of passing the child without a friendly word. Many who came from 3 or 4 miles distant brought her little presents. The humblest and rudest had good wishes to bestow. She had sought out the young children whom she first saw playing in the churchyard. One of these, he who had spoken of his brother, was her little favourite and friend, and often sat by her side in the church, or climbed with her to the tower top. It was his delight to help her, or to fancy that he did so, and they soon became close companions. It happened that as she was reading in the old spot by herself one day, this child came running in, with his eyes full of tears, and after holding her from him, and looking at her eagerly for a moment, clasped his little arms passionately about her neck.
'What now?' said Nell, soothing him. 'What is the matter?' 'She is not one yet,' cried the boy, embracing her still more closely. 'No, no, not yet.' She looked at him wonderingly, and putting his hair back from his face, and kissing him, asked what he meant. 'You must not be one, dear Nell,' cried the boy. 'We can't see them. They never come to play with us, or talk to us. Be what you are. You are better so.' 'I do not understand you,' said the child. 'Tell me what you mean.' 'Why, they say,' replied the boy, looking up into her face, 'that you will be an angel before the birds sing again. But you won't be, will you? Don't leave us, Nell, though the sky is bright. Do not leave us.' The child dropped her head and put her hands before her face. 'She cannot bear the thought,' cried the boy, exulting through his tears. 'You will not go. You know how sorry we should be. Dear Nell, tell me that you'll stay amongst us. Oh, pray, pray, tell me that you will.' The little creature folded his hands and knelt down at her feet. 'Only look at me, Nell,' said the boy, 'and tell me that you'll stop, and then I shall know that they are wrong, and will cry no more. Won't you say yes, Nell?' Still the drooping head and hidden face, and the child quite silent, save for her sobs. 'After a time,' pursued the boy, trying to draw away her hand, 'the kind angels will be glad to think that you are not among them, and that you stay here to be with us. Willie went away to join them, but if he had known how I should miss him in our little bed at night, he never would have left me, I am sure.' Yet the child could make him no answer, and sobbed as though her heart were bursting. 'Why would you go, dear Nell? I know you would not be happy when you heard that we were crying for your loss. They say that Willie is in heaven now, and that it's always summer there, and yet I'm sure he grieves when I lie down upon his garden bed, and he cannot turn to kiss me. But if you do go, Nell,' said the boy, caressing her and pressing his face to hers, Be fond of him for my sake. Tell him how I love him still, and how much I loved you. And when I think that you two are together and are happy, I'll try to bear it, and never give you pain by doing wrong. Indeed, I never will.'
The child suffered him to move her hands, and put them round his neck. There was a tearful silence, but it was not long before she looked upon him with a smile, and promised him in a very gentle, quiet voice that she would stay, and be his friend as long as Heaven would let her. He clapped his hands for joy, and thanked her many times, and being charged to tell no person what had passed between them, gave her an earnest promise that he never would. Nor did he, so far as the child could learn, but was her quiet companion in all her walks and musings, and never again adverted to the theme, which he felt had given her pain, although he was unconscious of its cause. Something of distrust lingered about him still, for he would often come, even in the dark evenings, and call in a timid voice outside the door to know if she were safe within, and being answered yes, and bade to enter, would take his station on a low stool at her feet, and sit there patiently until they came to seek and take him home. Sure as the morning came, it found him lingering near the house to ask if she were well, and, morning, noon, or night, go where she would, he would forsake his playmates and his sports to bear her company.
'And a good little friend he is too,' said the old sexton to her once. 'When his elder brother died, elder seems a strange word, for he was only 7 years old, I remember this one took it sorely to heart.' The child thought of what the schoolmaster had told her, and felt how its truth was shadowed out even in this infant. 'It has given him something of a quiet way, I think,' said the old man, 'though for that he is merry enough at times, I'd wager now that you and he have been listening by the old well.'
'Indeed we have not,' the child replied. 'I have been afraid to go near it, for I am not often down in that part of the church, and do not know the ground.' 'Come down with me,' said the old man. 'I have known it from a boy. Come.' They descended the narrow steps which led into the crypt, and paused among the gloomy arches in a dim and murky spot. 'This is the place,' said the old man. 'Give me your hand while you throw back the cover, lest you should stumble and fall in. I am too old, I mean rheumatic, to stoop myself.' 'A black and dreadful place!'
exclaimed the child.
'Look in,'
said the old man, pointing downward with his finger. The child complied, and gazed down into the pit.
'It looks like a grave itself,' said the old man.
'It does,'
replied the child.
'I have often had the fancy,' said the sexton, 'that it might have been dug at first to make the old place more gloomy, and the old monks more religious. It's to be closed up and built over.'
The child still stood, looking thoughtfully into the vault.
'We shall see,' said the sexton, 'on what gay heads other earth will have closed when the light is shut out from here. God knows they'll close it up next spring.'
'The birds sing again in spring,'
thought the child, as she leaned at her casement window and gazed at the declining sun.
'Spring, a beautiful and happy time.
End of chapter 55.